Now, the fact that there are now 41 standard disclosures in the sale of a single family home owner occupied in the state of California. 41. If we got together as a group, we couldn't come up with 41. So that's the subtext of all of my classes. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. If you're not, shift the risk to somebody who is. And the fact that we help people make the largest monetary decision they will probably make in their lives puts us far in excess of any used car salesperson. So I made a commitment in 1982 to do whatever I could to help professionalize my industry. And one of the ways I found I could do that was by delivering continuing education courses like this. I'm an instructor with CAR, so I teach all of the designation classes. I'm also a designated instructor from the National Association, so I teach all over the country. What's interesting now is everything's by Zoom, so I'm going to places I've never been before. It's kind of interesting. They all need education. I'm also a certified real estate consultant from the American College. I got my GRI, my DREI, my CREC. I just needed more alphabet soup after my name, so I just got another designation. Actually, the reason I got my CREC, Certified Real Estate Consultant, was because when I'm working with buyers, wait a minute, let me ask you something. How many of you have ever dealt with a buyer, showed them everything in the multiple listing, and they bought through somebody else? Y'all been in the business more than 15 minutes? Well, after that happened a number of times, I said, you know what? The next time somebody wants to pick my brain and waste my time, I'm going to charge them, just like any other professional would. You see, I call you professionals because you are defined as such in our state constitution. We have a constitution here in California. It was codified in 1879. It says if you have a state-issued license, that's the DRE, thank goodness not the BRE anymore, and a requirement of continuing education, that's 45 hours every 4 years, you are considered a professional in the state of California. As professionals, we're held to a higher standard. If I'm held to that higher standard, I want to be compensated at that higher standard. So my office policy at MJC Realty in Newport Beach is, you walk into my office, you say, I want to buy real estate. I say, terrific. The first half hour is free. After that, you either sign a buyer representation agreement or a fee agreement. If you won't do that, don't let the door hit you on the way out. You see, I've gotten old and grumpy. I don't have to put up with the boneheads anymore. Now, this leads me to my 3 caveats. A caveat is a promise to do or not to do something. Here's all I'm going to do here this afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about 1 to 4 residential units. That's it, 1 to 4. And the laws that are ancillary to those. My second caveat is I will tell you what those laws are, whether they're business and professions code, civil code, or commissioner's regulations. And I'll give you the citus for it so you can look it up yourselves if you're interested. But my last caveat is the most important, and that is, it doesn't matter what I say here, it matters what your broker says. Because your broker is ultimately liable for whatever you do under 10145 of the Business and Professions Code. So if I use buyer broker agreements, don't go back to your broker and say Joel said, because then I get in trouble. Just go back and say, hi, I was in class today. I learned some things. What's our policy? So you understand exactly how you are to represent that company as a real estate professional. So that's a little bit about me. What I'd like to do is have each and every one of you stand up, tell me how long you've been in the real estate business, who you work for, how much money you have. Well, I got to find a deal here someplace. Nah, if we did that, we wouldn't be out of here for the next 600 years. All right. So we're talking about the residential purchase agreement. Now, I know you've heard this. Well, it's going to change in 2021. Yeah, but we just don't know when. You see, these forms are put together by a committee, and that committee has been very busy with COVID-19 forms to the tune of 9 new forms since March 19th. So they've been working on the RPA, but we just don't know when it'll be, if it'll be January 1st of 2021 or not. But suffice to say, there's not that much changed. In the overall scheme of things, not that much has changed. They just put a roadmap as to how to find things. And I'll show it to you before we leave class today. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go into the California Association of Realtors website, you know, where that's where everything starts, car.org. And I want to make sure I'm showing this. Good. Okay. So this is where you come. Now, whenever I do a real estate transaction, I always come here to the new transactions, and this is now Lone Wolf. They have purchased the ZIP forms, and they purchased from CAR and NAR, who were the owners of it, basically from this aspect. Lone Wolf is a real estate software company that specializes in real estate software, whereas CAR and NAR are real estate representative companies that don't specialize in software. So they figured, you know what? We should probably let the propeller heads handle this stuff rather than we, as realtors, try to handle it. Probably be a better job. So anyway, they sold it to them. So now we have what we call Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf.
把它放大。
Up here, mute all. Okay. So this is where you would come, and this is where I come for all my real estate transactions. Now, you then go to continue, you know, after you put in your username and password, you go to continue because you paid your dues, and you come into Zip Forms Plus. Now, Zip Forms Plus is web-based. It's in the internet. If you cannot get a connection to the internet, you're out of business. When this all first started, I talked to Albert Tran, who is the executive officer at the West San Gabriel Valley Association of Realtors. And I said to Albert, we need a software program that resides on our computer. And he was instrumental in putting together something called Zip Forms Standard. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this is what I'm going to be using for the class today, because Zip Forms Standard doesn't have advertising. It doesn't matter if I'm connected up to the internet. Right now, it's checking to see if there's any updates. Oh, there's a couple updates here on EPUBs. And we'll go ahead and do that update. That'll be pretty quick. And then it also has all my transactions that I put together in there. So if I'm someplace and I cannot get an internet connection, I can go on, I can look at all of my contracts, all of the forms, all of my buyers and sellers. I can put together forms, and I can put them together in such a manner as that if they need to be signed, I can either print them out and have them signed, or I could, once I come back on the internet, I could email them and have them signed that way, or even through digital ink. So what you're looking at right now is called Zip Form Standard. It's up here in the left-hand corner. It is a software program. It resides on your computer. You do not have to be connected up to the internet in order to use it. Now, if you are connected to the internet, what it will do is automatically update everything that's in here. So here's Zip Forms Plus, or what they call Lone Wolf transactions. This is Zip Forms Plus. It's internet-based. Again, if I cannot get on the internet, I can't get to this, what you're seeing right now. It has a lot of advertising. It's a little slower than Zip Forms Plus. So that's why I like using Zip Forms Standard when I'm teaching classes, because then I don't have to decide, am I got an internet connection? Is it coming? Is it going? Is it wobbly? Is it not? So now it's going over my particular updates of my forms that came off the internet. And where you find this, if we come back here to car.org, you're here, you know, you always got the person sitting in the chair. I don't know what the significance of the person sitting in the chair is, but that's how you know it's the front page of the California Association of Realtors website. You come up here to Transaction Center. Now, this is where I'm going to show you where Zip Forms is. You click on Transaction Center, and it takes you to Lone Wolf Zip Form Edition, Zip Form Standard, and all the different things. So we've been using Zip Forms Lone Wolf. That's the one that's internet-based. Right below the Zip Form Standard. If you click on Zip Form Standard, it says, hi, would you like to download Standard? Well, yeah. How much does it cost? You've already paid for it. It's in your dues. It's a software program that resides on your computer that if you cannot get an internet connection, you can still do business. So if you're a PC, you click on this one. If you're a Mac head, you click on this one. You're in business. Whether you got an internet connection or not, this program resides on your computer. For those of you under 30, this is an app, okay? For the rest of it, it's just a program. So what I did is I wanted to show you, you go to Transaction Center, you just come down here to Zip Form Standard, you load it in. I believe we need to be good boy and girl scouts and be prepared. You never know when you're going to be someplace where the internet connection is hinky. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're in the middle of a presentation that's very embarrassing. So to have Zip Form Standard on your computer, you don't have to have an internet connection. You can, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to New Transaction. We'll call it the great state of Arcadia. We'll put in a date here. And we'll say it's a purchase. We'll say, okay. Now, you know, the other thing we always want to do is we want to have a cover sheet. What the cover sheet does is everything you add into the cover sheet automatically goes into your purchase agreement or any other form that you put in there. So if we put in the name of the buyer, John, let's see, John Chin. And we always have to have an email address. That's how this works now. So we put in, well, let's just put my address in there in case I hit something accidentally. I don't send it off to East Uganda and get myself in trouble like I always do. All right. So you put an email address in there. If there's two buyers, you put that. If there's more than that, then there's a seller. If we know who the seller is, we can put that information and then the property information. So we'll put the address in here, 6th Street in the great city of Arcadia and Cassie. State of bliss, and we got a list price and we got a sales price, you know, whatever those are. We'll move down here. We'll put in a small sales price of, now we always use nice round numbers for Joel because Joel is a product of the LA City School District. That means I cannot add, subtract, multiply, divide, or spell. Okay. I think I was just a lazy student. I don't think it had anything to do with the teachers. Actually, I was a math science major when I was in high school. I can do trig, I can do calculus, I can't add. So we'll use $100,000 sales price just for our example in our purchase agreement. It's a single family home. We can add all the rest. The more information we put into this cover sheet, the easier it is for us then to add forms that we don't have to keep typing. So the buyer's broker's name. So we're representing. Let's see, we got a little question here. So let's see what the question is. Why is the RPA form, why is the 2 RPA forms in zip forms? There's 3. Just for your edification, there's the RPA, the RIPA, and the CPA. RIPA is residential income purchase agreement. The CPA is the commercial property agreement, commercial property agreement. And I'm not sure, I don't think I got your question right, but suffice to say, if I put this in here into Zip Form Standard, it will automatically transfer to here, which is Zip Forms Plus or a lone wolf. So once I'm finished with this class, if I save it, or let's suppose right now, let's go back down here, let's fill out the broker's firm. Firm name, you always want to put that in here. So it's MJC Realty, and we'll put down the name of the agent. You always want to put the name of the agent in there because that's important. So Joel Carlson, that's a good one. Oops, well, no, let me see. Joel Carlson. And then you always have to have an email address in there. You know how they are with email addresses. We know who the sellers, you know, we're going to, the seller's broker's information. We've dealt with this firm before, Fly By Night Realty. They're just down the street. You've dealt with them. You know, they're just down the street. They're actually in Duarte. So let's see here. We'll put down the seller's, the agent's name. We'll give a name here. Let's see who we've got in here. Yeah, that's fine. And then an email address. We don't want anything too hinky here. Hold on, I'll get to your question in a minute. Once we get into this drop down. No, we'll just put this one in here. All right. So what I'm doing, I'm just putting some information in here so that when we do our RPA, it's a little bit filled in. When we know who the lender is, who the appraisal company is, who the title company is. If you have this information, remember, I represent the buyer. In this particular transaction we're doing here this afternoon, I represent the buyer. So I may have some of this information, I may not have other of the information. Then the disclosures finish up with home warranty, or the home HOA. Okay, so we got that done. Now we're going in here to select forms. Now they always, if you look down here, you know, if I'm over here and I have a new form, they always want to know if it's a new purchase agreement, whatever. It'll come up with this information. It looks a little bit different than what I'm doing, but if you practice with it, with the what's called zip form standard, you get the feel of what they're doing. So down here in the lower left hand corner, I'm going to pick up the residential purchase agreement and I'm going to put it in, because this is what we're working with here today. Let me answer this question. See, now if you do have a question, why is there two RPA and zip forms? I'm sorry, I meant to ask, why are there two versions? Oh, because one is, if you're on the internet, then you use zip forms plus, or what they call lone wolf. If you can't get on the internet, this is zip form standard. So you can use the zip form standard anytime you want. You don't have to have an internet connection, okay? So that's the reason there's two forms. They're exactly the same. They all have the same information. They have the same everything in them. They just have one if you can connect up to the internet and one if you can't. And the deal is, most of the time we can connect up to the internet. It's just when I get to someplace and the internet is there, then it's not. Then it's there. Then it's not. And the seller's looking at me like this, or the buyer's like, oh man, I got a good one. He can't even work his computer. So that's why. They got two of them there. I can't figure out how to import docs. We're going to talk about that, how to import docs here, because that's one of the biggies. And you can import it either in zip form standard or zip forms plus. It's the same function each way. And it's you have a structural pest control report. You want to get that signed, you can put it into zip forms. You got a property inspection. You want to get that out to the buyers and sellers and have them sign someplace that they got a copy of it. So I'll show you how to do that. Let's see, one other question, I got to move on here. Oh yeah, you like it, but you can't figure, oh, let's see. So you would use standards. I always use plus. I always use zip forms plus, because their forms are updated every second of every day. If I use zip form standard, I always have to make sure that it's good. So if I go out of zip form standard, let's close zip form standard. It says you want to save the changes, yes. It will automatically save those changes to the internet. It knows I'm on the internet. It then takes those and puts them up in here. So if I refresh this, let's go to refresh dashboard. It's now refreshing. Coming back to transactions. So in transactions, here's Arcadia. So I did the one that was offline, but because I was connected to the internet, it sent everything to my online. I always use zip forms plus because its information is updated all the time. Zip form standard, watch this. If I do zip form standard, it has to go out and check the internet to see if there's any updates. So that's what it's doing right now. It's checking to see if there's any updates. If there are, it'll update. So if you load this program up and you don't wait it, well, it's synchronizing so these are the transactions I'm working with right now. If you aren't connected to the internet, it will not know to update. So you might be working with old forms. That's why once a week, I start up zip forms standard just so it catches up on all the forms. But I always use zip forms plus, or what they call lone wolf, because its forms are updated every second of every day. But for the class, I'm going to use this one. And the reason is because There's no advertising. It's easy to deal with, and I don't have to worry about the internet. So we go here to Zip Forms, Purchase Agreement. And it always starts out with this. This is in all the purchase agreements. It's by law under 2079 of the Civil Code on all real estate transactions. Now, we're just talking about 1 to 4 residential right now, but on all real estate transactions, you must start out with this form. This form was mandated by the Sacramento, our legislature in Sacramento, in 1988. And it basically said you must follow a 3-step process. If you do not follow the 3 steps that are mandated under 2079 of the Civil Code, and when you say, where'd you get that from? What's on the back of this form? If you go to the back of the form, it's right here, 2079 of the Civil Code, in little tiny print you can't read. But I've read it because it's important that you understand these things. And it says in here, if you do not follow the 3 steps properly, disclose, elect, and confirm, you're not entitled to a commission. Now, I don't know about you, but that's how I get paid. So when somebody said to me, you got to know this stuff, I said, I'm going to learn it. So as we go through here, this form is, in my opinion, the #1 form that you use in the state of California in order to make sure you get paid. So this always comes up as the first form out the door. So the 3 steps are disclose, elect, and confirm. You give them this agency disclosure form. You find out from your broker which boxes to check off on the purchase agreement. That's election. And then the confirmation. The confirmation is so important. It's the second paragraph in your purchase agreement. And then you confirm it. So let's run through these 3 steps just to make sure in my itty bitty brain that you understand it. Because if this is the most important form to me, it probably is pretty important to you. So let's see, I'm a realtor, I'm buying for myself. Okay, so the question is, do I have to sign one of these if I'm selling my own property or buying my own property? The answer to that is yes, if you're schizophrenic. Otherwise, no, you don't have to sign. Are you going to rip? This is just telling you what your duties are. Okay, if you're going to rip yourself off, then yeah, you'd fill it out. Otherwise, no. You don't have to fill this out. Because basically, here's what this says. It says, if you represent the seller exclusively, you have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with that seller. If you deal with the buyer exclusively, you have a fiduciary duty to that buyer. A fiduciary duty is defined under Black's Law Dictionary as highest binding trust. But it goes on to say that if you represent the seller exclusively, not only do you have a fiduciary duty to the seller, you have 3 more duties to both buyer and seller. To both buyer and seller, diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in the performance of your duties. To both buyer and seller, an honest and fair dealings and in good faith. And this 3rd one, C, this is the biggie. This is Easton versus Strasburger, 1984. This is our precedent court case. This is the granddaddy of all disclosures. It happened up in North Central California on an area called Mount Diablo. You'll remember Mount Diablo.
Join the meeting.
It's one of the 3 base meridians that you learned when you got your real estate license. Humboldt, Mount Diablo, San Bernardino. Why do you remember that stuff? Anyway, we do. The houses were sitting on the side of a hill. Both agents knew there was soil problems in that area. Neither agent told the buyer. Later on, when the hills were sliding away, big cracks in the road, the buyer sued. And here's what the judge held in 1984. You must disclose anything that would materially affect whether the buyer or seller would sell. And the seller has to disclose anything they know. So this is the biggie. It says, 3rd item, a duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property. So if you represent the seller exclusively, you still have 3 other duties to the buyer. And if you represent the buyer exclusively, you still have 3 other duties to the seller. Honest and fair dealings, good faith, disclose all facts known. Okay, so we got all that. That's good. Now, when do you have to give them this form? It tells you specifically on the form when you're to give it. Now, if you look at the back, it will tell you, you have to give it out before they sign the purchase agreement or before they sign the listing. The problem is the form itself tells you exactly on the front of this form when you're to give it out. If you go down to the bottom of this form, it says right here, you hand this to the buyer, you hand this to the seller, and they're reading it. And here's what they read. The law requires each agent with whom you have more than a casual relationship, whatever that is, to present you with this disclosure form. The law requires you give this out to the buyer, to the seller, once you have formed more than a casual relationship. You might have homework when you finish with this class. As a matter of fact, I take classes all the time. And I always write down like 5 or 6 things from the class that I want to explore later on so that the class makes more sense to me. You're going to have some of those. You need to write down, go talk to broker, go talk to office manager and ask them, what is our definition at our particular company as a casual relationship? Here's the definition of a casual relationship at my company, MJC Realty. If you start showing them property, you form more than a casual relationship. You get them to sign this form. If you go on a listing presentation, you have formed more than a casual relationship. You get them to sign this form. Now, I don't know what your office policy is. You're going to have to write down the question and find out from your broker what's your office policy. I'm just telling you what mine is. And did I give you my caveats? I'm only talking about 1 to 4 residential units. I'll tell you about the laws that are ancillary to those. And the third caveat is, it doesn't matter what I say here, it matters what your broker says. Because your broker is ultimately liable for whatever you do under 101.3.1 of the Business and Professions Code. So if I say, this is when I give it out, well, it doesn't make any difference. What does your broker say? You're going to have homework. You're going to have to go back to ask your broker, hi, broker, how you doing? I was in class. Joel said this, what's our policy? So that you have a clearer understanding of how you're to represent that company as a real estate professional. You know why I call you a real estate professionals? Because you're defined as such under our state constitution. We have a constitution here in California. It was codified in 1879. And it says, if you have a state-issued license, that's the DRE, thank goodness not the BRE anymore, and a requirement of continuing education, 45 hours every 4 years, you are considered a professional in the state of California. As professionals, we're held to a higher standard, and that's why I use buyer representation agreements or fee agreements. I want to be paid for my time. Again, I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just telling you that's what my office policy is. Having only been in the real estate business for a short period of time, since 1976, and all the different things I've learned in that period of time, my time is valuable, and if people don't respect that, I'm not dealing with them. So you must give this out to the buyer once you have formed more than a casual relationship. So your first step is disclosure. You got to give them this agency disclosure form once you form more than a casual relationship. The second step is election. The election is your broker says, in this case, you represent the buyer exclusively. In this case, you represent the seller exclusively. And in this case, you represent both buyer and seller. So if you refer to the back of the form, if we go to the back of the form here, in little tiny print you can't read, if we go down in the middle of this form, here's an example of what is on the purchase agreement. Notice it's sample only. You're not to fill this out on this side. Why? Because it says don't fill out, bonehead. It's just a sample of what's going to go on the purchase agreement. It is so important. It's the second paragraph on your purchase agreement. And your broker says, disclose, you gave them the agency disclosure form, election is they tell you which boxes to check here, and then confirmation is you check the boxes on the purchase agreement. So if we go to the purchase agreement, we look at this, it says right here, second paragraph, agency confirmation. You put the name of the company in here, name of the agent, name of the company, name of the agent, put in the license numbers. You got to put that in now. And that's always, I'm always interested in the double O's. If your license starts with 00, I'm 0054. Anybody got a better number than that? A lower number? I'm always interested in saying, that's a beauty now. I can tell when you've been licensed. You get these people say, well, I've sold $1 million, billions of dollars worth of property. What's your license number? 0022. What? That means you've had your license for 15 minutes. Okay. You haven't been in the real estate business that long. So always make sure this information is in here. Now, this is the third step. Now, here's what's interesting. Nobody has read this contract, so you don't know, and that's why you're here today. And I'm going to tell you something. Once you finish this class, you're going to be in the top 5% of real estate professionals in the state of California, because you're going to know your contract and know what the different paragraphs mean in it and how to explain it to your clients. As a matter of fact, I appreciate you being here so much. I give you 3 deep bows for being here, because you are interested in your education and how to serve your clients and be a better agent. So this particular contract, though, nobody has read it. I know you haven't read it, because I'm going to ask you a question here. And if you answer it honestly, I won't hear you. But if you answer it honestly, I think you'll probably have a good feel for it. This is a real estate purchase contract. Okay. This contract is valid. We know under the laws of contract, you have to have capable parties. That means they have to have mental capacity as well as age capacity. It's the mental capacity I'm always wondering about with my buyers. You have to have lawful object. They have to own it. Do you know that we've had 2 instances where the tenants called an agent, said, we want to list the property. The agents went down there, said, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Jones. The tenants, who were Mr. and Mrs. Smith, said, yeah, we're Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They signed the contract. The agent put it on the internet, put it on the MLS, went onto the internet. It was sold. They went into escrow. The only reason it didn't get sold and closed is because the notary said, the ID that you have here and the ID that's on the 2 different people. Based on those 2 court cases, my office policy has been since last year, January 1st, 2019, is we ask for identification. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Joel Carlson. One of the ways that we protect your safety and protect your identity and make sure that we're really getting the best out of this, we ask you for your identification. We take a picture of it, we put it in the file, nobody does anything with it, but it's just for your safety and protection. Now, I don't know what your office policy is. Remember, I told you, you might have some notes you have to write down. You have to ask your broker about these. So this might be one of them. Do we ask for identification, or do we just take the word of the person sitting across from us we've never seen before? Maybe a tenant. And now all of a sudden here we are, listed a piece of property they're not even an owner of. 2 court cases we've settled up here. Second one, they had fake ID. They had fake ID. They showed it to the notary. The notary notarized it. It was going to be recorded. The title officer looked at the statement of information, the SI. These are 2 different people. Can you imagine if that thing closed and the money went to those tenants and they disappeared? Who's the only person left in town? Look in the mirror. Yeah, they'd have been after you for that. So I don't know what your office policy is, but one of the things we do is we ask for identification. That way we know that those are the people who really own the property, or at least they've got a namesake for it. Let me make sure I'm covering any questions we have here. It says, will training be recorded for view later? Yes, it will be. Yeah, we're recording it right now. Okay, so with that in mind, here's my question. So valid contract, state of California, capable parties, lawful object, mutual consent. I knock on your door. I say, hey, sign this contract. You say, I don't want to sign the contract. I say, it doesn't matter. Sign the contract. I'm buying your house. No, you have to say, yes, I want to sell. And I have to say, yes, I want to buy. Mutual consent. The 4th element of all contracts in the state of California is consideration. And consideration is defined as something given by one, accepted by another. Something given by one, accepted by another. We typically think of that as money. Could it be a watch, a ring, a boat, a plane, a train, a car? It can be anything given by one, accepted by another of value. Could it be love and affection? Absolutely. You'd be surprised how much real estate's traded hands for love and affection. It must be consideration. So, when we got our real estate license, here's what we learned. In order to have a valid contract in the state of California, enforceable in a court of law, we have a buyer signed. So the buyer signs the bottom of page 9. This is our purchase agreement. Buyer signs the bottom of page 9. The seller signs the top of page 10. Okay. So this is our purchase agreement. We learned when we got our real estate license, the buyer signs, the seller signs. Then, in order to have a valid contract enforceable in a court of law, you have to get the buyers, and you have to what they call is confirmation. So buyer makes an offer, seller accepts the offer. You got to communicate acceptance back to the buyer. The way this form is designed is we get the buyer's signature on page 9. We get the seller's signature on page 10, and then we get the buyer to initial this paragraph right here underneath the seller's signature. Now, you don't have to do this. It says right in here, you can confirm this in a number of different ways. You don't have to get their initials. I'm just telling you, this is the way this form is designed. That if you get their initials, there's no discussion. If it goes to court, they say, did the buyer accept? Yeah, he initialed. Buyer made an offer, seller accepted the offer, communicated acceptance back. I have their initials. So in order to have a valid contract enforceable in a court of law, buyer signs the bottom page 9, seller signs the top page 10, and then they get the initials. Now here's my question to you. Are you ready? You then sign this contract. You sign this contract right down here. You have the right to sign on the behalf of the brokerage based on the independent contractor agreement that you have. You can sign down here and obligate the brokerage. So here's my question to you. Buyer makes an offer, seller accepts the offer, we communicate acceptance back. Valid binding offer in the state of California. Now you sign the contract. Excuse me. If you sign the contract, are you a party to the contract? If you sign the contract, are you a party? No. It says right here, real estate brokers are not parties to this agreement. It's right above your signature, and you don't see it. You say, well, if I sign it, I must be a party. No, no, no. The only reason you're signing the contract is you're confirming your agency relationship. That's the only reason you're signing the contract. Disclose, elect, and confirm. It's the little things that'll put you out of this business, not the big things. So we come back up here to the agency disclosure. We've given this out to the buyer. They signed it. We told them what our duties are. Sometimes when they sign this, they go, wait a minute, if I sign this, I have to deal with you. No, it's not a buyer representation agreement. This is an agency disclosure agreement. And it merely tells you what my duties are. And when you sign it, you're acknowledging a receipt. You don't have to work with me. It's just a receipt for this disclosure. It tells you what my duties are. All right. Then we come down here. This is the entire code. A little tiny print you can't read, but I've read it. We come down to the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Excuse me. This particular form, this is the next one. Part of the purchase agreement, it says, if I represent more than one buyer, multiple buyers, is that okay with you, buyer? Yeah. If I represent more than one seller, is that okay with you, seller? In other words, I got two buyers that are making offers on the same piece of property, or I have several listings in this area, and this particular buyer wants to make an offer on this one, but not another one that I have listed in the area. Is that okay with you? That's what this is asking. And then it says, if I'm dealing with you as a dual agent, is that okay? Now, just for your edification, in the state of California, we can be dual agents. About 60% of the United States cannot represent both buyer and seller. Basically, it's the Western United States that can do that. When everything started, it was 1620. They came from England. They settled up the East Coast, and they brought with them English common law. English common law is Mortgages. We don't use mortgages in California. We use trust deeds. A mortgage is a two-party debt instrument, mortgagee, mortgagor. A trust deed is a three-party debt instrument, trustee, trustor, beneficiary. And the reason that we use trust deeds here in California, that we have different community property laws, that we have dual agency, is because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 that said, you, California, and most of the Western United States must use Spanish law. And Spanish law is trust deed, three-party debt instrument, is more inclusive in the community property, and says that certain foreclosure laws are going on, and that you, the agent, can represent both buyer and seller. The East Coast, they can't represent both buyer and seller. They can represent one, the buyer or the seller. Whenever I go to a convention, they see my badge, they go, oh my God, I'm from New York. You're from California. How do you do that? How do you represent both buyer and seller? I'll say, well, I'm schizophrenic. It's easy. Well, they all think we're crazy out here anyway. So what this is saying, is that okay if I represent you as a dual agent? If they say no, then we got something we need to discuss. Now, here's my question to you. Realtor A has this listing, and I've got an offer on the listing. I'm going to show them this offer. I say, hi, call up Realtor A. I say, hey, Realtor A, I got an offer on your property. He says, terrific, send it on over. So I send over the offer. Realtor B, different company, calls up and says, hey, A, is that property still available? Yeah. Do you have any offers on it? Realtor A says, yeah, I got Joel's offer on it. Realtor B says, tell me what the offer is. Can Realtor A tell Realtor B what my offer is? Offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advised that the seller or the listing agent may disclose the existence of the terms or conditions of the buyer's offer. Now, I've been taught all my life, you can't, if I have an offer, I'm the listing agent, I can't tell another agent what that offer is. Here it is in writing. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. Not only is it here, it's on your 14-page monstrosity called the Statewide Buyer and Seller Advisory. This is the second disclosure that's into your purchase agreement. It says right here you can do this. So I asked some questions at CAR Legal about this, and here's what I found out. Yes, you can do that. So now it becomes incumbent upon me. That's who I represent in this purchase agreement. I represent the buyer. I got to say to the buyer, hi, buyer, we're writing this up. Oh, by the way, did you know that the seller can tell other buyers what your offer is? I've never had a buyer yet say, yeah, I knew that. That's okay. They always say, what? Yeah, if you give me this offer, I give it to the seller or their agent may tell other agents or other buyers what your offer is. Buyer says, oh. I say, do you want that? If they say, no, I don't want them to be able to, then we're going to have to get what's called a confidentiality agreement. It's a form in zip forms. You come down here, we'll go into search. We'll put in confidential. So here's our confidentiality non-disclosure agreement. And it says right here, the offer dated such and such. I give this, before we send the offer in, I get the signature of the buyer, the seller's agent, and the signature of the seller on this. Then we present the offer. Now, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you these forms are available. So if in fact, one more back, if in fact you get into this situation, you will know. You need to ask your buyer, did you know this? No, I didn't know it. Is it okay with you? No, it's not okay with me. Then I need a confidentiality agreement. And you fill out the confidentiality agreement. You send it to the listing agent. You have the listing agent and the seller sign it. Then you give them the purchase agreement. There's so many things about this purchase agreement you had no clue about. You're learning some stuff here. Right. Then we come on down here to this next one. This is the wire fraud electronic service. So here's what happens. You're sitting at Starbucks, you're sitting at Panera's, you're sitting someplace where there's open Wi-Fi. You're typing along. Hackers have a program, have a way to get into your computer through the Wi-Fi. So they can see what you're doing, they can get into your computer, they can see what you're emailing. So what happens is you get an email, or maybe the seller sitting there too, or the seller's gone someplace and they're sitting on the internet. They then send out, they send a message to their escrow company. Escrow company sends them an email back saying, hi, this is the escrow company. When we go to close, we're going to ask you to wire money. So what happens is the hacker sees that email and they spoof it. They make an email that looks exactly alike. They already have the seller's email address. They already have the information on the escrow company. They then they then email the buyer and say, buyer, this is your escrow company. When you get ready to wire the money, wire it to this wiring address. That wiring address happens to be in East Uganda. So when the buyer wires the money, it's gone. Who's the only person left in town? Look in the mirror. Okay. I don't want to be there. So one of the things that you want to make sure of is that you have a VPN, a virtual private network, a VPN. Some computers are built with it. This particular Lenovo has a built-in VPN. But this has been a problem for a long time, and I've been using computers since they first started in the real estate business. See, when I started in the real estate business, we didn't have computers. We had multiple listing books. You had these books. You had a big book. You carried this thing around with you. Somebody says, I want to buy something. You say, what area, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what price range? You'd look it up in your book. You then go to the payphone because you had a pocket full of dimes. You put a dime in, you'd call up, say, hey, is the property still available? They'd say yes. Then you put in another dime, say, hi, can I come show the property? Now we all do it by our smartphones, okay? But just, so when computers first started, I knew intrinsically that I had to become vested in them. If I wasn't, I'd be out of business. I'm one of the 3 instructors at the California Association of Realtors under the GRI program that teaches the technology portion of it. So a VPN, that's a virtual private network. When this all started back in the 80s, and I knew somebody could hack into the Wi-Fi, I said, I need protection. And the protection, the protection afforded, there were all sorts of VPN companies out there. The one that I picked was called Hotspot Shield. Why? They were the first one I clicked on. It looked like it was a good deal. It was free. The reality check, is anything free? No. They advertised me to death till I finally said, fine, I'll pay for it. So here's what happens. My internet connection is locked down. If I'm connected to the Wi-Fi, my internet connection goes to Charlotte, North Carolina, and it stops. So if somebody hacks into my computer, they're going to take a ride to Charlotte and they're going to wind up at Charlotte. They're going to go, what the heck's going on here? And the boys at Charlotte are going to say, hey, listen, are you hacking into Mr. Carlson's computer? Let us work on you a little bit. Okay? So my information is protected. They can't get into my computer. They just wind up at Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay, or whatever other place you have. So I'm just showing you this one. It's not the end all to beat all. There's all sorts of VPNs out there. It's a virtual private network. That's what they're talking about in the water fraud electronic transfer. And it talks about you need a VPN. Both buyers and both sellers need a VPN. There was a whole treatise on this from your Realtor magazine. It talked about, it was a whole article on VPNs. Let me make sure I've answered questions here. Oh, okay. What if there's no confidentiality agreement between the 8 people involved? Well, if you haven't signed a confidentiality agreement, if they haven't signed it, can the agent show your offer? Yeah. I've never had a seller yet say, oh, no. Don't get me more money for my unit, my real estate. I've never had, they always say, yeah, tell them what it is. Let's get a bidding war going here. Sellers always tell you that. It's the buyers you need to talk to about this. And that's who we're representing here in this particular class today. We're representing the buyers. So that's why I bring this up. So now we come down here to wire fraud. Just make sure, and what they do now is it's a two-step process. They talk about, so we establish this all. We get a special little number. Buyer gets a special little number. And it's not over the internet. It's not over email. They get that special little number over the phone. Then a month or two later, when we're going to close escrow, the escrow company sends them a wire instructions. The buyer then contacts escrow, calls them up and says, hi, I've gotten your email. What's the magic code you gave me when we opened up escrow? They'll say, blah, blah, blah. You'll say, okay, I will wire to that wiring instructions, not to something else. And if they are not the same people, they won't know what that little code is. It's a two-step process. I use it with PayPal. I use it with a lot of different things where it's the thing that it goes out and then I get a text. It says, here's the magic number. So if I don't have this phone, there's no two-step, nobody getting money out of nothing. So this is just a third item that we have going on here. Then we finally get down to the dadgum purchase agreement. Now, the purchase agreement starts out over here with a date. This date is your date. This date has nothing to do with the buyer and seller. This has to do when you started writing the contract, and it's used in this manner. If there's a counter or if there's an addendum, it says the purchase agreement dated such and such between Mr. and Mrs. such and such and Mr. and Mrs. such and such for this property. It identifies the purchase agreement. This is just an identifier number. It could be a number like 568-483, be the same thing. It's just an identifier. So when they say, well, that's not when we signed it, no, it has nothing to do with you. Oh, that's not when I accepted the offer, no, it has nothing to do with you. That's my number. So I can identify this particular purchase agreement, dated such and such between these people on this property. We put down the name of the people. We put down how much they're going to buy it for. We put down escrow is going to close. When is escrow going to close? And we always figure this out. Well, it's not what the seller wants it to close tomorrow and the buyer wants to move in tomorrow. But we have some situations. We have to get title insurance. We have to get the appraisal. We have to get the loan. So we have to figure out what the amount of days. So they say, okay, we need 30 days. That's nice. How long is it really going to take? Talk to your escrow company. They do this all the time. They'll say, oh, if it's a 20% down, 80% loan, you've got pre-approval, it'll probably take 45 days. Then that's the date you put in there. Not some arbitrary date that makes everybody mad. I know we all want to close quickly, but what's the reality? Talk to your escrow company about that. And then it says, here's my disclosure regarding agency. It says, here's my confirmation. We put this all together. We come on down here to potentially competing offers. Offers are not necessarily confidential. See, it says closure and dissent. Price of terms, and then we have the initial deposit. The initial deposit. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting. This initial deposit, the purchase price, $100,000. Remember we use that? Nice round numbers for me. You will have it. You'll see it in the listing. The buyer must submit their offer with 3% as the deposit. Where's this coming from? Well, it's coming from something called the liquidated damages clause. I want you to understand, it does not have to be 3%. That's an arbitrary figure that the agent has picked out based on it is the maximum amount the seller can keep. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If a buyer walks in my office and says, I want to buy a piece of property, and I say, what would you like to have as a deposit? He says, I got $562 in my checking account. I'll write you a check for that. I'm going to write the offer. And I'm going to put down $562 in here. It is a binding offer based on the fact, remember what I told you, consideration, I promise to buy, he promises to sell. You don't need money. If they promise to buy and he promises to sell, you have a valid binding offer in the state of California. That's consideration. and it can be sued on, even if there's no money involved. Now, we know this. I promise, that's nice, put money in. Right? But whatever they give me, I'm going to write up the offer because it's a promise for a promise. The money is just what the seller gets to keep if the buyer backs out with no contingencies. So let me tell you where this magical 3% comes from. We go down to the bottom of page 3. At the bottom of page 3 is number 9. Number 9 talks about closing and possession. Bottom of page 3, number 9, closing and possession. It says the buyer intends to occupy the property as their primary residence. As long as this box is not checked off, they're going to occupy as their primary residence. This is your first test as to what amount can be kept by the seller if the buyer backs out. It's going to be owner occupied. It's limited to 3%. Where did they get that? Page 8, number 21, paragraph 21, it says liquidated damages clause. And they initial this. Now, here's what you're initialing. You're initialing the first sentence. This says B, 21B, liquidated damages. If the buyer fails to complete said purchase because of the buyer's default, the seller shall keep as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. That's all you're initialing. The balance of this paragraph is a restatement of the law. So they're saying, rather than go to court, rather than go to arbitration, if we both initial this clause, you're going to keep my deposit. As I'm the buyer, you're going to keep my deposit. We're not going to court. We're not going to arbitration. It goes on to say, if the property is no more than 1 to 4 units, what am I talking about here today? 1 to 4, good. One of which the buyer intends to occupy, then the total amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. That's where they get this from. But this is only applicative if there are owner occupied, and it's 1 to 4. If it's non-owner occupied, if at the bottom of page 3, they check the box that says does not intend to occupy, this 3% has nothing to do with it. It's only owner occupied, a dwelling of no more, one of which the buyer intends to occupy. 1 to 4 intend to occupy. So if you're dealing with investors, they don't get this liquidated damages protection of 3%. They get the liquidated damages, which means whatever the deposit is, that's what I'm going to keep. So it's a $100,000 property. The guy says, I really want this property. I'm going to put up a $50,000 deposit, 50% deposit. If the buyer backs out and does not have any contingencies, if it is an investment property, the seller can keep the $50,000. If it is owner occupied, and the way we determine this is bottom of page 3, number 9, they didn't check off non-owner, then the maximum out of that $50,000 that can be kept is $3,000. $100,000 sales price, 3% of $100,000, $3,000. So when we're talking up here, when we come back up here to the top of the page, page 1.
他叫什么名字啊？到时候我们如果真的客人需要翻译，也可以找他。
Hold on.
那你把他名字找出。
Got to mute up here a little bit. All right. So what we're talking about here is the 3,000. The 3,000 is the maximum that the seller can keep, and that's where they come up with this. So I always look in the thing. They say we need it must be 3% of your offer price. Whether it's accepted or not, I don't know, because that's the maximum the seller can keep if it's owner occupied. If it's 1 to 4 non-owner occupied, they could keep the entire deposit, whatever it is. Non-owner occupied, no protection. It's only owner occupied, 1 to 4, they can keep up to 3% of the purchase price. Now, watch what happens down here. And here's another thing I love. This particular purchase agreement and anything coming up, it always says right here, buyer shall deliver the check directly to escrow, either electronic funds or check. I never touch the money. If I don't touch the money, I don't have to write it in my trust fund register. Under 10145 of the Business and Professions Code, which is trust fund handling. And about 90% of agents lose their license based on this. They just didn't write it down properly. They didn't do it properly. So what this says here is the buyer shall deliver it to escrow. I don't touch it. If I don't touch it, I don't have to worry about trust fund, writing it down in my trust fund register. None of my offices have trust fund registers because the purchase agreement says the buyer takes, and I'm not a party to the contract. I love this business. This contract's written up for us. Make it protect you as well as your buyers and sellers. So later on down here, they say we want to increase the deposit. Now, I've been doing this business for a long time. I've had 2 instances in my career where we have increased the deposit. It's not something that happens every day, but if it is not handled properly, it is a career ender. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose the buyer says, you know what, I really want this property. I'm going to give them 3%, and then I'm going to increase it by another $7,000. So I'll have 10% into this deal. Now, I hear you out there. You're saying, well, wait a minute, Joel. There ain't no properties out there for $100,000. Okay, add a 0. It's a $1 million property. This is not $3,000. This is $30,000. This is not $7,000. This is $70,000. Here's what this says. You must provide an RID to protect this other $7,000. That's a receipt for increased deposit. If it is owner occupied, 1 to 4, buyer intends to owner occupy, then the seller can keep 3%. If the buyer backs out with no contingencies. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the likelihood the seller will back out with no contingencies is very small. Here's how it works. The deal's closing tomorrow morning. They call you right now, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, say, cancel the escrow. Well, you can cancel, but everything's done. You're going to lose your deposit. Buyer says, I don't care. Cancel the escrow. The seller can keep a maximum of 3%. So they're going to keep this $3,000. Now watch what happens. The buyer increased that to $7,000 to a total of $10,000 to make it a real juicy offer for the seller. The first $3,000 is covered by this agreement, the RPA. Anything other than that, this $7,000, you have to have an RID. It's called a CAR form RID, receipt for increased deposit. If you do not have an increase for deposit, the seller can keep this amount also. It was limited to 3, but you increased the deposit and you didn't get a protection in there, RID, so now the seller can keep the 3% plus any other deposit because you forgot. You say, well, $7,000, that's not a big deal. Remember what I told you? Put a 0 behind it. $1 million property, $30,000 down, $70,000 increase, buyer backs out. Buyer did not know that he was supposed to have an RID. You forgot to give him the RID. He just lost $70,000. Who are they going to come for? You. That's why you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. If you're not, shift the risk to somebody who is. And that's why I applaud you for being here today, because you're learning more about this contract than 95% of the other agents out there. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This is not a big deal. This is a little deal. If it's an investment property and the investor, remember bottom of page 9, bottom of page 3, number 9, if it is non-owner occupied, then there is no protection clause. The protection clause is only if it's owner occupied, 1 to 4. So if it's an investor, I want to buy a piece of property for investment, the seller can keep the $3,000 and the $7,000. There is no RID that protects an investor. So this only works with a owner occupied 1 to 4. And that's why bottom of page number 3, number 9, they're going to owner occupy, and then paragraph 21. Even if they don't initial it, it still kicks in. It's part of the law. The seller can only keep 3% of the deposit. So we got 3, We raised it to 10. The buyer backs out, but it's owner occupied. How much of the 10,000 can the seller keep? 3,000. That's it. The other 7,000 has to be returned. Why? It's owner occupied. They gave an RID that protected this 7,000, and it's 1-4. Okay. Let's take a look, see if we got some questions here. It says, why is the liquidated damages clause in, okay. Okay, we're only doing the RPA, but if you look in the RIPA, they have a liquidated damages clause with an RID in there. And if you look at the CPA, commercial purchase agreement, they have a liquidated damages clause with an RPA in there. Why? I don't have a clue. They're not going to owner. First of all, on an RIPA, you could owner occupy. You could live in one of the units and be covered by this 1-4. In a CPA, commercial property agreement, which is a CAR form, there's no zoning that I know of C that lets you live in the property. Okay, it might be a modified R, but C, I don't know. So that's, I don't know, it's just an idiosyncrasy of the CPA, the commercial property agreement, but the RIPA could be 1-4. They owner occupied 1 of the 4. This particular form is made for 1. You could use it for 4, but it's basically for 1. That's the idea behind it. The RIPA is the residential income purchase agreement. You buy a 4-plex, you live in 1, you rent out the other 4. That's an income property, or more than 4 units. It just depends on how you want to use it. You have to read them over and get there. So that's the answer to that particular question. Oh, look at this one. What happens if they click off all cash? Look at C, 3C. If they click cash, can they still get a loan? Absolutely. Cash is cash. It doesn't matter where they get it from. But here's the game. They say, I'm going to buy it for all cash for $100,000. I want to close in 30 days. Seller says, well, you know, I wanted more money for the property, but since there's no loan contingency, show me the money. They say, okay, here's the money. Show them the funds. It's attached. Seller says, okay, I'll take the offer. Now, the intent of the buyer was never to pay all cash. It was to get a loan. And it wasn't to close in 30 days. It was to close in 45, 60 days once they got a loan. They were just scamming. They said to the buyer, we'll buy it all cash. They were never intending to buy it all cash. They were going to get a loan anyway. And they weren't going to close in 30 days. They were going to close when they got the loan, 45, 60 days. So with that in mind, what we have to do is we have to make sure that they understand, if in fact you buy this property all cash, you, buyer, must adhere to what's in the contract. 30 days, all cash. If you get a loan, that's fine. Close in 30 days. That's all. Because it says on the next page, if we go on down here, it says on the next page, buyer's stated financing. Sellers relying on the buyer's representation of the kind of financing specified. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date and purchase price. Buyer to pursue any financing specified in the agreement, and the seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyer's efforts to obtain financing other than what's specified in this agreement. So if they said, we're not getting financing, and now they say, we want to get financing, that's okay. Close within the period of time. That's all. If you can't close, then we're going to have to renegotiate, because your contract says you're going to close within this period of time. You can get a loan. I don't care if you get a loan or not. You said you're going to buy it all cash. You get a loan, that's cash. I don't care. But if you were scamming me to get a lower price based on the fact that I thought you were going to buy it all cash and close within 30 days, and then you come back to me and say, no, I want 45 days, 60 days, I get your deposit as the seller. You just forfeited your deposit because I have no obligation to cooperate. That makes it interesting, doesn't it? So if we come back up here to page 1, we have an all cash offer, or we can say, no, it's not all cash. We're going to get a loan. If it's going to be a loan, you know what the loan is going to be because you have a pre-approval letter. You have a pre-approval letter, right? Why would you ever show property without a pre-approval letter? Why would you ever show property to somebody you don't know whether they can buy it or not? So they got a pre-approval, just fill it in. It's a conventional loan. It's not to exceed 3% financing over 30 years and 1 point. Whatever it is, whatever the approval letter, whatever the pre-approval letter says, not pre-qual. Pre-qual is they put a mirror underneath your nose. You fog it up, you're pre-qualled. Pre-approval means I've checked your credit, I've checked your income, I've checked the savings you have. You can qualify for this amount of loan if we find the property and the property appraises and we can get a title insurance policy, you got a deal. Otherwise, nope. So whatever those figures are, if it's a second, same thing. If it's FHA-VA, you just have to add one of these forms. And these forms, basically FVAC or FVA, they talk about minimum property standards. It's got to have water that heats, air that heats. You got to have a roof that's good for 5 years and doors and windows that lock. Plus, it has to appraise. That's what these say here. And by the way, if you look at this word, CAR form, it shows up in here 40 times. In other words, you could add to this 16, this is a 16-page form, you could add 40 more forms to it. Just count them. Go through and count them up. Then you put down additional loan terms. Okay, additional loan terms of this. Seller to pay 4% of buyer's costs, however they don't want to divide it up. You know, they just put it in like that. If it's buyer's non-recurring or recurring, however it is. Okay, that's where this would go. Then the down payment, then we initial, and then we come on to page 2. I know some of you out there going, crying out loud, Joel, we got all these pages to go. Are you going to get through this thing in time? Yes. I've only been doing this for a short period of time, since the 1990s. We're going to get through the entire contract. I just had to get it set up in the first couple of pages, and then we're going to move through it fairly quickly. So top of page 2, what we're going to do is take a little break. It's 2:15. We'll take about a 3-hour break. About a 10-minute break. We'll come back here at 2:25. Go out and I got to get some more Go Juice. You know, everybody's drinking juice. I'm drinking Go Juice here. So I got to get a little more Go Juice. And then we'll get started at 2:25, and we'll be out of here no later than 7 o'clock tonight. Oh, that got your attention. No, 4 o'clock. Done. Things to do, people to see, money to make. 4 o'clock. Okay. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutos. Ándale, pues. There are so many people on the web doing webinars that they don't have enough bandwidth. So that's why I have to wear a headset here. So we have a question. Let's see what the question is. Let's see. Outline or record. Yeah, we're doing a recording of this. Stephanie, your educational director at the association, will have this available to you and send it out to everybody. So, and it's one of those things, I'm with you. I sit through these things all the time because as a real estate, as an instructor, CAR instructor, I always have to update myself. So what happens is I see these different things that the attorneys do and I go, you know, I heard what you said. I saw what I don't remember. I don't remember how you got there. So yes, they are recording it. All right. Let's go on to top of page 2. It talks about verification of down payment and closing costs. So they're going to get a loan. They're going to have a down payment. That's terrific. Show me the money. Now, reality check. Do I care? No. Who cares? Seller cares. Seller says, you're buying my property. You want me to take it off the market. Show me you have the down payment and show me that you've talked to an escrow company. You know what your closing costs are going to be approximately. And that you have that amount of money. Probably the best thing to do is check off that you have it. You know, show them it's attached. That's the strongest kind of offer. And if I'm dealing with a buyer, the first thing I always want to do is make sure they're pre-approved. Second thing I do is say, if you were a seller, wouldn't you want to make sure that the buyer had the amount of money to buy the property? Yes. Then why don't we attach that with the offer? And then we get the appraisal contingency. If they click it's not a appraisal contingency, fine. Most of the time they just make it a contingency. Even if they're buying it all cash, they'll make it a contingency. So if they have to get an appraisal, they can go ahead and get the appraisal. And if it comes in low, back out of the transaction, even if it's an all cash deal. So it says, let's see, this is being recorded, posted on the website tomorrow. All right, good. Then we get our loan application. You got 3 days to get the loan application in. Well, if you're pre-approved, we already got that done. And the loan is a contingent. This is a contingency. If you can't get the loan, and what happens here is the property doesn't qualify. You say, wait a minute, the buyer's qualified. How could they have still a loan contingency? The property has to appraise and you have to be able to get title insurance. So that's how it could blow up. Then you got a loan contingency, 21 days. I always looked at this. Where the heck do these days come from? Oh, let's make sure that we're clear on this one. So we're looking at this purchase agreement here. Who do you think wrote up this standard form? Not who filled it in, I filled it in. Who wrote up the standard form? The standard form. You think attorneys? No. It was written up by realtors such as yourself. They are volunteers. They meet 4 times a year, and they're the ones who put together all of these forms. There are over 100 standard forms now. And they put them together. They then give them to legal staff at CAR, our attorneys, and make sure they're admissible in a court of law. So if you look at this form, you go, dadgum attorneys. You're not mad at them. You're mad at yourself because it's realtors who put these forms together. So when we go to page 2 of this and we're looking at these loan applications, I know this was written up by, where did they get 21 days? So I called up, I found out the 21 days is how much is the minimum amount of time under federal law, under what's called TRID, that you can get loan approval, loan contingency removal, because you have different disclosures you have to make. Now, I know there's some lenders out there that can do it in less than 21 days. God bless them. That's what it says under federal law. That's why they put it in here. No loan contingency. Now, wait a minute. They didn't click off that they're all cash, but on the second page, they clicked off no loan contingency. Can they still get a loan? Yes. It's just not contingent on it. If they come back and say, oh, well, I didn't qualify for the loan. No. If the property didn't qualify because we can't get the appraisal or we can't get title insurance, that's one thing. You didn't have a loan contingency in here because you checked off no loan contingency. So you lose your deposit. That's how that deal works. Lender's limits. It says any credit to the buyer from any source other than for closing costs or whatever shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender. wait a minute here. What was at the bottom of the page here? It says seller to pay 4% of the buyer's costs. Is that what they're talking about here? Absolutely. They're saying you got to disclose that to the lender. You can't say, oh, I'll pay some of your costs under the table. Everything has to be on the table. Anything that you want included in this contract has to be in this contract. If it's not in the contract, it doesn't count. It's not enforceable in a court of law. And I led you down the rosy path because under Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines, they will not be able to sell a loan that has 4%. The maximum they can go is 3%. So what's going to happen is the lender's going to look at this and say 4% can't do the loan. Why? We can only allow 3%. You say, okay, we'll change it to 3%. Seller goes, oh darn, I was going to pay 4%, I can only pay 3%. They probably already knew this, but I'm just telling you, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines, you got to disclose it to the lender, and the lender will say, you got to reduce the contractual amount to the lender's allowable amount. It says buyer stated financing, we've talked about that. And if you do not, and here's one of those things, I always try and make sure it's clear on this. Buyer or seller, let's suppose I represent the seller in this situation. They made an all cash offer. 30 days into the deal, they say, you know what, we got to get a loan. Well, the seller can back out of the deal because it says they have no obligation to cooperate with anything and keep the deposit. Or what was the whole idea behind this exercise? Sell the property. If you're interested in selling the property and the buyer now comes back and says, wait a minute, I got to get a loan, I need more time. Seller, don't blow out the deal. Sit back, take a deep breath and say, time is money. Buyer, you need more time? Give me more money. And this is what always happens. We come to some point in time in the escrow and the buyer says, I need another 30 days. The seller says, are you kidding me? I can't give him 30 days. If I don't move, I'm going to have to pay this, 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 and this. If I move, I'm going to have penalties. I'm going to have this. Well, how much are those going to be? It's going to be this amount for this amount for that. It comes up to $10,000. Okay, so if the buyer needs more time, it's going to cost you, Mr. Seller, $10,000. Right. Hi, buyer. You can have more time. Just give us $10,000. Time is money. So don't blow out the deal. Just ask them if they'll give more money. You said you were going to close in 30 days. You should have had that all figured out. If for some reason you can't close in 30 days, COVID-19, that's something different. But if there was nothing, then you lose your deposit, buyer. Rather than you lose your deposit, we'll just extend the period of time. But it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost me as the seller money. You just pay those costs and we'll go ahead and give you more time. Otherwise, you lose your deposit. Then we come down to the sale of the buyer's home. If the buyer is going to sell her own home, we're going to click on this. It will add another form to this. And it says the buyer's going to have to sell their home. Let me see where we are here. If they've got to sell their home to buy a new home, we just need a COP, another form, contingent on property selling, buyer's property selling. And it says on there, who's it listed with, and if it's an escrow, who's it an escrow with. My policy at my office is, tell me who they are, let me call, I represent the seller. Let me call and verify you've sold your home, buyer, that you're going to close escrow. And if I can determine that, I'll tell the seller. Now the seller can say, oh, well, the buyer's going to close on their home. They'll have enough money to buy my home. We'll take it. That's what the COP is for. And then we got backup offers. We got probates. We got statewide. Boy, have you seen this monstrosity? Statewide buyer and seller advisory. That's 14 pages of court cases we've lost as realtors that we don't want to do again, so we make it a disclosure. Actually, it's an advisory. It used to be the disclosure because you'd initial every page. Now it's not it's just an advisory. Just says, hi buyer, how you doing? Just in case you're interested. And you need to look at this form. This form is an anathema, in my opinion. So if we go statewide, search for that, statewide buyer and seller. This is a 14-page form. It says right here, 1 to 14. And it says, here's what the duties are of the buyer. Here's what the duties are of the seller. Here's what your duties are as the agent. Here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the physical conditions of the property, the ownership of the property, any offsites, legal requirements, contractual issues, any factors that affect the property, and any local disclosures. And it says, if you buyer want to know, are there easements, access, or encroachments in the property? Get a survey on the property. Brokers do not have expertise in this area. If you're concerned about the environmental hazards, look at your NHD report. Brokers do not have expertise in this area. Okay. Formaldehyde, geologic, pests, mold, pets, soil, square footage, well water, wood, buildings, fair plan, heating, historical, insurance, land. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, that's owners and title insurance, rent control, short-term views, swimming pools, golf courses, neighborhoods, schools, death on the property, EPA, fire hazards, flood hazards, Megan's Law, maps, zoning, arbitration, mediation, identification of natural persons, liquidated non-confidentiality of offers. Remember I told you it's in the second disclosure on your purchase. Here it is again. They can disclose the buyer's information. It says right here. Online funds transfer, that's general recall, homeowner association, we're only on page what? 12. Legal action, marketing, pace, oh, here's my favorite, rekeying. Now remember, every one of these I'm showing you is a court case that we've lost as realtors. That's why it's in here, so that you give it to your buyers, you give it to your sellers, they read it over and they say, oh, what's this rekeying? Well, a rekeying, you know what, there's the court case. The buyers moved in. They did not change the locks. The sellers came back, stole everything out of the house. They then sued the agent saying, you should have told me to change my locks. What are you, a head of lettuce? Of course you should change your locks. So now we put it in here. Solar panels, and then local disclosures. You might have local disclosures for your area, especially, you know, some of the mountainous areas and some of the things that go on there, wildfire disclosures, things like that. So this is just another form that might go with your purchase agreement that you want to make sure that your buyers have seen and agree to. Okay. So sale of buyer's home. Then we get down to any other items. Here's the statewide, and then other terms. Other terms. This would be buyer is licensed. Agent is related to buyer. Those kinds of things. That's what would go in here. Buyers has a real estate license. Agent is related to the buyer. And then other costs. Now, allocation of costs. This is where it talks about if there's any natural, these are allocations. Either the buyer pays for it, the seller pays for it, or like an escrow, it would be 50-50. So they would pay their, you know, one half, whatever's customary. Now, what's customary, and you know, everything's negotiable. So they don't have to do customary stuff here. They could do, you know, they could say, the buyer, check the seller has to pay for everything. That's a good way to tick off the seller. I'll tell you right now. Okay. So what this says is, here's who pays for what. Now, there's this one area right in here, and it says that they shall pay the cost of compliance of any minimum government standard retrofits. I've seen that left blank a lot. If you leave it blank, it doesn't make it go away, okay? And the laws in the state of California say this: as of January 2019, January 1st, 2019, all residential properties, whether it's apartments, single family homes, must have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. That's law. And what this is saying is who pays for that. You leave it blank, so what it says is, hi seller, you're saying you have low, and if your house was built before 1994 and you haven't had any improvements on it, it does not have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. So it's out of compliance with government retrofit. If it's had some improvements, they may have updated them. Suffice to say that if you close the deal, here's what the seller's saying: I have put in low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. You know what the problem is? Nobody checks this stuff. There's nobody checking this stuff. There's nobody out there saying, oh yeah, it's low flow. We're just relying on what the seller says, and the buyer says, well, I guess it's low flow. I don't know. Wait. When the water shortage comes up again in California, and it will, you're going to have water police, and they're going to be going door to door. Hi, wanted to check to see if you have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. And if you don't, you're probably going to get fined, and you're going to have to put them in, because this is not point of sale. As of January 1st, 2017, all homes had to have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. As of January 1st, 2019, all residential, that's apartments, homes, condos, have to have low flow showers, low flow commodes, low flow faucets. And that's what this is talking about in here. Just letting you know. And, you know, as we're going through here today, you say, you know what, Joel, you look like a nice guy, but I don't think you know what you're talking about. Let me give you your ultimate fallback position where you can verify the information you're getting here today. Area code 213-739-8282. What's that? That's the CAR legal hotline. Call them up. Tell them Joel sent you. I want you to be comfortable with this information. All right, then we come down here to escrow and title, and you check off the box. What I always do is I call escrow and I say, who would normally pay for this? In a normal, whatever normal is, and that's who you check off. Now, they can always say, no, I want the buyer to pay for this, I want the seller to pay for this. It's all negotiable. But who would normally pay? Because I know this, if you say, I want one party to pay everything, it usually ticks the other party off. Now, there's certain things you can't have all. And remember, I was telling you, HOA fees, your HOA, that's under 4525, and it says the seller has to pay for these and the buyer has to pay for these. That's just law. If you say, well, I don't know what that means, well, read up on it. Just go to car.org, type in AB, Assembly Bill 4506, or actually it's under Civil Code now, Civil Code 4506, and it'll give you a whole explanation. And then any other services, it's included, you know, notices that exclude from sale. Now we get down to some interesting things, and it says, here are the items that are included and excluded. Included: electrical, mechanical, dishwashers, garage door openers, landscaping, trees, shrubs, water features. If you check off the stoves, then the stoves. If you check off the refrigerators, then the refrigerators. If you check off the washers, then the washer and dryer. If they're not checked off, they don't have to stay. This contract says if you have not written it down in this contract, you don't get it. I love this when I say, they come up and they go, well, in the flyer, I got a flyer from the house and the flyer says that this is included, whatever it is. I said, well, did they write it in the purchase agreement? No, then you don't get it. If it's not included, it's not in their purchase agreement. I don't care what it says in the flyer. I don't care what it says on the MLS. You have anything in there that you want, buyer, you got to write it in here. If it's not written in here, you're not going to get it. It's going to be stays with the seller. Then we get down integrated phone systems, devices, control, passwords, permissions, codes, access info. What the heck is that? Ask the 12-year-old. They know what that is. This is how they play their games. They know about all this stuff. This is a smart home. And more homes are becoming smart homes. So if you're listing one and they give you this information, you have to make sure it gets passed on to the buyers, just like you'd pass on to the keys and the garage door openers, remotes. Then we get down to items that are excluded. I love this one. All these things are excluded, including such things as flat screen TVs and speakers. Now, I've been in some homes, they got speakers built into the ceiling. I'll say, well, it says here the speakers can go. The buyer gets to take them, seller gets to take them with them. I said, buyer, are you aware that they're going to leave a big hole in your ceiling up there? Buyer says, I didn't know that. Well, you better address it here. They say, I want those speakers. Well, then write it in here. Write it in here. I want my damn gum speakers. Otherwise, they're going to take them. All right, let's see what we got in the old chat room. All right, lenders delays closing. Can the seller cancel a deal if the buyer, okay. Is it contingent upon financing? Yes. So the lenders delayed it. This happens. Here's what I know. I've been doing this long enough, I can tell. We got the access, we got this going, we got that going. If certain things aren't going, we're not going to get lender approval. The lender's still working on it. Either the lender's trying to sell a loan or they just haven't got all the stuff that they need to underwrite. I know it's going to get closed. I contact the other party and I say, look, we need more time. Don't contact them after it's supposed to close. That makes them mad. A week ahead of time, say, hi, the lender's taking more time than is necessary. The buyer still wants to buy. You still want to sell. Give us more time. Ask for the extension then. Don't wait till after it's supposed to close and ask for the extension. Now the seller's mad. And then it says, if all appliances, what do we still check off the three? I don't know. Ask your buyer. I don't know what boxes you check off. What does the buyer want? Remember, you're not a party to the contract. You ask your buyer. Buyer, you want that? Yeah. You want that? Yeah. We want that? No. Okay. They want it, just check off the box. Remember, I'm not a party to this contract. You're just going through the contract with the buyer. Buyer says, yes, I want. No, I don't. And then if they say, what does that mean? You tell them what it means. Good. Now we got these, I love this. So what's included? Well, these items. Okay, what's not included? This flat screen TV. I got a flat screen TV. It says they get to take the flat screen TV, but they have to leave the brackets. Well, wait a minute. The brackets are specialized to that TV. I have to take them. Oh, well, if you have to take them, it says the brackets and walls are included unless you check the box. So if you check this box here, it says you're going to remove the brackets, you're going to fix the holes and any other damage, but you're not going to paint it. Because if you paint it, they're probably going to put another flat screen TV up. The guy that puts up the flat screen TV is going to want to know where are the brackets. They don't want to put them in the same holes. So if you paint them, they can't see. You just leave them all. So now you can put the bracket up there and they can put it in different holes so it's into the structure of the building and the flat screen TV won't fall off. If you say, I want them to paint it, well, then just write it in. Paint the damn things. Just put it in here. Okay, it's not tough. Some buyers get real excited. Well, why can't I do? You can do anything you want. You're the buyer. It's just we got to get the seller to accept. Don't look at me. I'm not the buyer. I'm the agent. I have nothing to do with this deal. Don't look at the other agent. They're not a party to the contract. Do you know how I know they're not a party to the contract? Did I already yell at you about this? Oh, okay. I can see some people out there kind of going, what's he talking about? Page 1 of the purchase agreement, paragraph 1, E, buyer and seller are referred to as parties. Brokers are not parties to this agreement. It says it on the first page, and it says it on the last page. On the last page of this purchase agreement, you're not a party to the contract, and we still don't see it. You need to read the stuff you sign. You're signing the contract. You should read this. You're asking the buyer and seller to sign it and read it. You should read it. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. If you're not, shift the risk to somebody who is. You say, I don't want to read all this stuff. Well, then refer it away. It's pretty simple. Just say, hi, you want to take over this deal? I'm referring it to you. Okay, and then we talk about closing. So this basically says, paragraph 9A, they intend to occupy, good, and it's going to be available at 6 p.m. Now, it used to be 5 p.m. Why is it 6 p.m.? I don't know. Daylight savings time. Who knows? It's just 6 p.m. now. Now, because this form was written up by realtors, we have we've had a problem in the past. Here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help it. We're trying to mitigate it. We're trying to take care of it. So the next paragraph, C, says, the seller remains in possession of the property after close. So here's what happens. The deal is supposed to close today, the 27th of July. It doesn't close. But if it was supposed to close today, here's what happens. The buyer has all their stuff on a truck. It's circling the block at $900 an hour. At 6 p.m., they want to move in. The seller, he's gone, and he's waiting for his check so he can use that to close his next escrow and move in. If it does not close for whatever reason, lender, title, whatever, they're all mad at you. They say it's your fault it didn't close. How did it get to be my fault? I want the deal to close. I don't get paid until it closes. So this particular paragraph, C, was designed to mitigate that problem. So here's what it says. If the seller's going to stay in the property after the closing, then here's what we want. We want to have an SIP, seller in possession. It's a rental agreement. And here's what it says. Seller, you get to stay there for however many days. Let's say 3 days after the close. So it was supposed to close today. It didn't close. Seller hasn't moved yet. Buyer hasn't got his stuff going yet. Let's suppose on Friday it closes. Now the seller has 3 days to move out. Saturday, they pack up everything. Sunday, they put it all on the moving truck. Monday, they clean up the house, and at 6 p.m. on Monday, buyers move in. This solves a lot of problems, because if the buyer says, wait a minute, I'm ready to move in, but it hasn't closed, there's money being spent every hour that stuff is on the moving van. So this is one of the ways in which to mitigate this. But remember, this is a rental agreement. This says I'm giving the seller the right to stay in the property for 3 days or 5 days, 10 days, 1 day, whatever it is. During that period of time, I want to make sure of 2 things. Number 1, that there's insurance and that there's legal advice. When the seller closes the deal, if the seller closes the deal and the seller's still in the property, they don't have insurance anymore, because the insurance they had was homeowner's insurance. They are not a homeowner anymore. They're a tenant. And if they have a claim and they go back to that company and they say, I want to claim, I got robbed, they're going to say, you had a homeowner's policy. You're now a tenant. That's not a tenant policy. We're not paying. That's why you want to make sure. Hi, insurance company. The seller's had you for however many years. The seller's going to sell. They're going to stay in the property for 3 days, 2 days, whatever. They need insurance on their personal property, not the building, just the personal property and liability for that 2 or 3 days. The insurance companies will always write a policy. They may charge $100 or something, but they'll always say, yeah, sure, no problem. The buyer, they're not the owner they're not an occupant yet. They're a landlord. So they have to have landlord insurance. So you want to make sure you talk to the seller's insurance and the buyer's insurance, that they understand that they're going to stay there for this amount of time and that they have a policy for that period of time. They just call it a rider or an addendum. At the end of that period of time, buyer's in the property, seller's gone. Everybody's insurance is good. but you want to make sure. Tenant occupied, if there is tenant occupied, and that's why you could do this. And if it's tenant occupied, there's no liquidated damages. Seller gets to keep the entire deposit because it's only owner occupied that limits it to 3%. Now, let's suppose that the buyer puts in $2,000. They should have $3,000 is the maximum the seller can keep, but the buyer puts in $2,000. The seller accepts $2,000. The buyer backs out at the last minute. How much can the seller keep? $2,000. They don't get $3,000. It is whatever the deposit that they agreed to is what the seller gets to keep. And if it's $3,000 is what they agreed to, and there's a $5,000 deposit in there, this contract says the escrow must give $2,000 back to the buyer and $3,000 to the seller, because that's the maximum they could keep. Owner occupied. That's what we're talking about here. Then it says close of escrow, any warranties, you'll assign any of the warranties. You agree that unless it's in writing, you're going to provide keys and passwords and codes for everything, internet operation. So it's a smart home. There's some things built in. You're going to pass them on. Now we get into the statutory disclosures. And this is where it talks about, here's the lead-based paint. Here's the TDS. Here's the SPQ or ESD. So TDS, transfer disclosure form, SPQ, seller property questionnaire, ESD, exempt seller disclosure. And then it does talk about the AVID down here, agent visual inspection disclosure. So if we look at this by law, we come down here. Did we get a TDS in here yet? What happened here? Oh yeah. Nope. Okay. So this is required by law on the sale of all residential property 1 to 4. It's called the real estate transfer disclosure form. This is required on the 1 to 4 residential units. This has to be filled out by you. You say, I don't fill out this form. The seller fills out this form. Oh, really? Well, the seller fills out page 1, and if they're exempt, they don't have to fill it out. If they're exempt, then they don't have to fill it out. The seller fills out page 1, the seller fills out page 2, and then it says page 3, agent's inspection. You fill out page 3. By law, it's under 1102 of the Civil Code. 1102 of the Civil Code. You, I'm talking to you, must do a diligent visual inspection and write down what you see. This comes from Easton versus Strasburger, 1984, codified under 1102 of the Civil Code in 1986. And it says you must do a diligent visual inspection of accessible properties and fill this out. You say, well, I don't fill this out, Joel. I always fill out the AVID. Oh, okay. Well, let's get the AVID here. AVID. This is the agent visual inspection disclosure. The agent visual inspection disclosure. This is not written up by our legislature. The TDS was written up by our legislature. This is a required form. It's a 3-page form written up by our legislature, given to us in 1986. When you sell single-family homes, 1 to 4 residential units, you must fill out this form. You say, but we fill out this form. This form was not written by the legislature. This form was written by standard forms. Realtors such as yourself. It is under the Civil Code for disclosures, but it is not mandated, as is the TDS. This is mandated under the Civil Code 1102. You, even if the seller is exempt from the first 2 pages, you still have to fill out page 3. The agent representing the seller and the agent representing the buyer. You must do a diligent visual inspection and write down what you see. Now, as you can see, this is a crummy form. Okay, this form is not a very good form. So that's the reason why standard forms put together this AVID. This is a 3-page form. First page tells you how to fill it out. Second page says go into the entryway, write down what you see. Go into the living room, bonehead, write down what you see. It's a more complete delineation of your interior inspection and approval. It's a better form, but it's not required by law. It's contractual, it's in your contract, but it's not required by law. This is required by law. It's under 1102, the Civil Code. You can read it. If the seller's exempt, they don't have to fill out page 1 and 2. You still have to fill out page 3. There's no exceptions. Area code 213-739-8282. I'm just trying to help you out here. Now, if your broker says not to fill this out, remember, third caveat, doesn't matter what I say, matters what your broker says, because your broker is ultimately liable for you. So if your broker says you don't have to fill this out, I will come visit you in jail. Okay, I'm happy to do that. I'm just telling you what the law is. Not telling you how to fill it out, just telling you what the law says. So with that in mind, when we come back here to the real estate purchase agreement, and we come down here to the statutory disclosures, it talks about the TDS. It talks about the SPQ, Seller Property Questionnaire. And it also talks, if you're exempt, it also talks about the AVID. These are these up here are statutory. They're in the statutes. This is contractual. They're in the contract. So some you have to fill out by law, sometimes you don't. All I know is that I never get in trouble for too much disclosure. It's always I forgot something. That's why I teach the class on the 41 standard disclosures in the sale of a single family home owner occupied. There are 41, probably 42 now. There are 41 standard disclosures in the sale of a single family home owner occupied in the state of California at this second in time. If we got together as a group, we couldn't come up with 41. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. And Stephanie, your educational staff, make sure that you get that course at least a couple times a year, because it's important. They change all the time. I did a class recently and we added the COVID forms, 9 COVID forms, and all the disclosures that go along with that machination. So it's getting interesting out there. Then we come down to the buyer. Buyer may waive some of these. It says the event the seller's brokerage firm has any knowledge, they will make that aware. So the seller finds out something about the property. They tell the agent. The agent has to tell the buyer's agent, and the buyer has to agree to it. And if they say, no, we don't agree to changes or any of these kinds of things, you have to give them this amended disclosure within those business days, and they've got 3 days in which to say, no, I don't want the property, and they're out of it. No harm, no foul, get their deposit back. So if the roof leaks and they fix the roof, you got to disclose that. And then the natural hazards disclosure. This is a booklet. It talks about 6 requirements: 2 earth, 2 fire, 2 water. Talks about those in here. Flood zones A through V, dam failure, inundation, earthquake fault zones, seismic hazard zones, and the high fire severity, what is it called? State Fire Irresponsibility Act, and this one scares me to death. Very high fire hazard zone. I don't know where that is, but I don't want to be there. So those are in the booklets. That's required by law. You have to make those disclosures, but we all get an NHD. So that covers that for us. Withholding taxes are taken care of by escrow, so we don't have to monkey with that. The FERPTA is the federal. FERPTA is federal. You just ask, hi, escrow. You're already handling California withholding law. The state of California says escrow has to handle the form. And here's what the form says. What's the seller's name? What's their tax ID number? They sign it. It goes in the file. Nobody looks at it again. That's Cal withholding. Federal, same. They put their name on it, their social security number, tax ID number. They sign it. It goes on nobody looks at it. Nobody verifies anything. So if California law says escrow has to do this, why can't California escrow companies do FERPTA? Well, they can. They just have to have a QS called a qualified substitute. So it's a form. It's a zip form. They can use that form, and it says we're doing both. We're not supposed to, but we'll do both because the federal government says we can. Escrow can do that for you. Then Megan's Law. Megan's Law is very specific. Megan's Law says if there's any sexual offenders, you tell them to go to this website. Are there any sexual offenders? Go to that website. Are there any sexual predators? Go to that website. You are not to say, there goes one. That's how we get ourselves in trouble. Don't do this stuff. Give them the disclosures. Then the natural hazards. This is gas, that's natural gas or gasoline, hazardous liquid transmission pipelines, whatever else is hazard going through the pipelines. This court case came down from San Bruno. A guy was in his backyard. He had a backhoe. He's digging a hole with the backhoe. He hit a 6-inch gas line. He blew himself up and 6 houses. So now it's a disclosure. It's on your purchase agreement. It's in your NHD, your natural hazards disclosure. It'll say you're within 1,000 feet. You, new buyer of this home, are it's on your NHD. 1,000 feet of a gas or hazardous liquid transmission pipeline. So that's taken care of. If it's a condominium, you have to give them the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, restrictions. You have to give them the documents that show they're incorporated, that show what the rules and regs are. You have to give them the last 12 months of the HOA meetings, regular meetings. You have to tell them what the reserves are. Are there any smoking restrictions in here? Where's their parking and storage spaces? Now, I don't know this stuff. I'm the agent. Who knows this stuff? No, the homeowners association, they can't find with both hands. It is the property management company that the homeowners association hires. They have real estate licenses just like you do. They're a property management company. They have this information. So you contact them, you get this information from them. They charge you for it. If you go to the homeowners association, they'll say, yeah, it's around here someplace. But these people, that's their job. The property management company, that's what they're paid to do. Condition of the property. Oh boy. Are you ready? Strap yourselves in. I'm going to put you on SpaceX. We're going to take off. Strap yourselves in. Okay. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, the property is sold as is. You say, what? I didn't think we could have as. Yes, it's right here. You can have as is property. So here's what happens. The buyer walks in and goes, oh, I love this home. I want to buy this home. The seller says, okay, but this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this doesn't work. Buyer says, I don't care. I love this home. They buy it. We go into escrow. The buyer orders a property inspection. The property inspector comes back and says, hi, buyer, how you doing? Listen, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this doesn't work. The buyer goes, I want those fixed. No, you're buying the property as is in its present condition. I told you those things don't work. I'm not fixing them. Now, I, the agent, have to disclose anything I know that's materially affect whether the buyer buy, and the seller shall disclose anything they know that would affect the property. So we're going to tell you everything. If you want it fixed, we don't have to fix it. It's as is in its present condition. Now it's all negotiable. It's all negotiable. I just had a situation where they said, we want this, this, and this fixed. And the seller said, okay. And I said, you don't have to fix those. He said, you know what? It's a nice young couple. I like them. I want them to be happy. Okay. That's a seller buyer decision. Investigation of the property. The buyer has the right to do investigations, to have inspectors come to the property and look it over. If, in fact, the sellers agreed to this, they signed the contract, then they will make it available for the buyer's inspections, and they will leave on the gas, water, and electricity. If they do that, and the buyer does all these inspections, if in fact somebody gets hurt or any damages arise out of the investigations, buyer falls off the roofer falls off the building and gets injured, the buyer will hold the seller harmless. The seller didn't want those people on the roof. The buyer did. If they fall off the roof and they get hurt, the buyer will protect the seller in any claim or remedy. That's what this says. So buyers, make sure they have the people that you're having doing these inspections, they have a license and they're insured. Otherwise, it's going to come back on you. You can't get the seller to help out. Title investing. Here's an easy one. Just tell them how to take title. There's 6 ways to take title in the state of California. Just tell them one. It says the manner of taking title may have significant tax or legal consequences. Therefore, consult your attorney. Okay? May have legal or tax consequences. You never tell them how to take title. You tell them, go to your attorney, tell them. So that because if you make a mistake, you're liable. They're going to get a CLTA title policy or ALTA, and then there's time periods for removal. There's 7 days or 17 days. These are arbitrary figures. The 17 days comes from 2 weeks plus 3 days. 2 weeks plus Saturday, Sunday, and legal holiday. And it says, if the buyer wants any repairs done, they're going to put together an RR. If you want a pest control inspection done, it's on the RR, request for repairs, section 1, section 2. It's not in the contract anymore. And if the buyer makes a request for repairs, RR, the seller responds back with the famous pirate form. There's all sorts of different forms in here. Basically what it says is, if you want something fixed, you ask the seller. Seller can say, no, I don't want it fixed. They don't fix it. The buyer has a choice. Either back out of the deal or get their deposit back, or go ahead and take on the responsibility. And the contingencies continue until somebody says, no, I don't want to buy anymore. I don't want to sell anymore. I'm not going to fix. Then we go on from there. And the buyer shall have access to the property. I want to look, I want to measure for carpet. I want to measure for drapes. I want to get paint chips, things like that. And if they click off this box, that one always scares me to death. C, removal of all contingencies without, if you buyer, it's a hot market. They say, I want this house, but you got all the, not remove them all. I'll take care of all the problems. Buyer, here's what you're saying. F, effect of buyer's removal of contingencies. If the buyer removes the contingencies, they have completed all their investigations, they elect to proceed, and they take responsibility and liability for any repairs. If you check off this box up here, removal of all contingencies, that's what you're saying. So I would want to make sure we did some contingencies before we got obligated to buy the property and then find out you got major problems. Right to cancel. Buyer has a right to cancel. Seller has a right to cancel. Buyer, if the buyer cancels, seller has a right to their deposits. If the seller cancels, the buyer has a right to get their deposit back. But it goes on and it talks about notice the buyer to perform. So we get into one of these situations where the buyer, something's happened, and the seller's saying, is there something going on here I should know about? Yeah, well then what? We don't know what's going on with the buyer's financing. Then we want to give them a notice to buyer to perform. Or the seller, they won't give title, they won't give access, nobody can do their inspections. Then we give them a notice to seller to perform. Let me just tell you, if you give them one of these notice to perform, let's suppose it's a 45-day escrow. On the 40th day, they still haven't done what they're supposed to do. You give them one of these notice, either the buyer notice to perform or seller notice to perform. You just gave them a way to step out of the contract. No harm, no foul. So you give one to the buyer notice to perform. The buyer can now say, boy, am I glad you gave me that. I'm out of the deal. Give me back my deposit. You can't keep it. Same thing with the seller. You give it to the seller, seller can say, wow, I'm glad, I don't want to sell you the house. Okay, I'm out of the deal. Here's your deposit back. I'm going to take it and sell it for more money. You need to be very careful with these forms and read over these different forms. I told you there are 40 of them that could be attached here. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. And if you remove all the contingencies, here's what you're saying. The close of escrow, on or before, we're going to have, and we're supposed to have everything done. It's a week after escrow is supposed to close. We can't find out why isn't the buyer performing or the seller performing, one or the other. So we give them a notice to DCE, demand to close escrow. If you give them a demand to close escrow, you just gave them a way to get out of it. They got another 3 days to say, you know what, we don't want this property. Or, you know what, we don't want to sell the property. No harm, no foul. You get back your deposit, or I get the property back. So be careful of these forms. You pull these forms out and they just start using them. Well, if the buyer wanted to back out anyway, you just gave them a reason to back out. No harm, no foul. They get their deposit back. Notice of cancellation on deposits. So it says, if you mutually sign instructions, everybody agrees to it. So it says, there are these costs, you get this, you get that. Everybody's happy, they sign. Typically what happens though is somebody's upset about something, or the escrow instructions don't come. The seller says, I cannot get a hold of the buyer's agent, the buyer's broker, or the buyer. I can't get a hold of those buyers. It's been a week. It's been, I don't know, a month after the close, and we can't get a hold of these people. Here's what this says. Now, this is kind of interesting in the contract. If either party fails to execute a mutual instructions to close, one party may make a written demand to escrow for the deposit. Whoa, wait a minute. It took 2 signatures to make this a contract. Now you're saying one party can get out of it? That's what this is saying. There's a special form for this, and it goes on. It says the escrow holder, upon receipt, shall give notice to the other party. If within 10 days the other party does not object to the demand, the escrow holder will disperse the deposit back to the party making the demand. Can't find the buyer. Can't find the buyer's agents. Can't find the buyer's broker. Escrow says we sent out a 10-day notice. At the end of 10 days, they can take that deposit and give it to the seller. That's what this paragraph says. Now, escrow was a little nervous about that, so they said, okay, if the escrow holder complies, then we want to make sure that neither party can deem to hold them liable. So in other words, I release the money. 2 days later, they released the buyer's deposit to the seller. The thing was supposed to close a month ago. We gave 10 days notice, put out the notice to the agent, put out the notice to the broker, put out the notice to the buyer, nothing for 10 days. Escrow releases the money to the seller. 2 days later, a week later, the buyer comes walking into the escrow company. They got their pith helmet on. They're all dusty, dirty. They say, I just got back from safari. What's going on? We gave your deposit to the seller. What? I'm going to sue you. No, you're not. You already signed this agreement saying you're not going to sue me. You signed it. However, they reserved, the escrow companies of California reserved the right to say escrow holder at its discretion may nonetheless require mutual cancellation instructions. The contract says, took buyer and seller to get into it. The contract says if you make a demand for one in a 10-day period of time and that one does not respond, then you can either release the money back to the buyer or release the money to the seller, and you won't hold the escrow liable. This last sentence says the escrow holder at its discretion can say, I'm not gonna follow your escrow instructions. You're not a party to the contract. How did you get in the middle of this? Well, it's one of those simple things where they got the money. You want the money? They don't have to release it. And their attorneys have, in some instances, have told them, no. You release it back to one party without the written consent of the other, you're going to get sued and you're never going to win. So in this particular case, if the escrow holder at its discretion requires mutual cancellation instructions, does not release the money, if the buyer and seller start fighting over it, the escrow company is going to give it to the courts, and you're going to interpleader action. And I want to make sure you're clear on something else too. Let's see, we're at bottom of page 6. This form is the real estate purchase agreement and escrow instructions. In the state of California, if you want to sell a single family home, do you have to go through escrow? No. Remember that when you got your real estate license. The only thing you have to go through escrow for is the liquor license. So you don't need an escrow company. This is the escrow instructions. Your purchase agreement is the escrow instructions. So if you don't use an escrow company, you don't have to comply with any of this. Now, if we go to bottom of page 6, all right. So bottom of page 6. All right, let's see what the question is here. Okay, if the offers are not confidential, why does the seller's agent disclose the offers received from the buyers in case of multiple offer situation? Why do not the agent? I don't know. I showed you in writing. It's not confidential. Here's what it is. They're not educated. They haven't read the contract. You're never, ever going to get a seller that says, don't get me more money. So they're always going to say, yeah, tell them what the offer is. Get multiple offers. Get the bidding more up. Get me more money. I've never heard a seller say, I don't want more money. The agents will say, I can't do that because they're uneducated. They haven't read the contract. The seller would never tell them not to disclose those other offers. This is an agent brain fleeb because they haven't read the contract. I told you, I was always under the impression you couldn't do that. But there it is, in writing, signed by all parties. Have you looked at this form? This form is signed by all parties. This form is signed by all parties. It's signed by the seller, it's signed by the buyer, it's signed by the buyer's broker, and everybody's signature is on this form. So this is not they're not hiding anything here. People don't read stuff. You need to read the things you sign. You need to read the stuff you ask people to sign. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. And that's why I applaud you for being here today, because you're learning more than 95% of the other agents out there. I guarantee it, because I teach this class all the time, and I've been teaching it since the 90s. And it's amazing to me how many times I ask a question and the people go, no, it's not. It's right here in the purchase agreement. You can't do that. Well, I don't think you should be able to do that. Well, it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what's in the contract. And secondly, you're not a party to the contract. Don't get Joel started. Come down here to page 6. All right. Now, verification deposit of the contract. Let's see. Yeah, we finished up with that. Now we get to top page 7. It says verification of final condition. Are you ready? Remember, I told you, I'm strapping you in. You're at the top of SpaceX. We're going to launch you. Now, you ready? The buyer has a right to final confirmation of the property, verification of the property within 5 days prior to close of escrow. This is not a contingency of sale. The buyer walked in, the buyer fell in love with the house, said, oh my God, I love this house. The grass is green, the pool is blue. 5 days before the close of escrow, they do their inspection and they've switched. The pool is green and the grass is dead. The buyer says, I'm not closing escrow. That's not a contingency, buyer. You have to close escrow, and you can proceed against the seller upon any claim or remedy you may have under law. So what the contract says. Repairs. Remember, we had a little leak, 16. We had a little leak. It says, okay, buyer, you've told me, the seller said, tell the buyer there was a leak. I repaired the leak. Okay, I'm the buyer. I'll buy the property if you can show me invoices and paid receipts. I want to see what you did, invoices, and I want to make sure you paid for it so that there's no mechanics lien against me as the buyer after the close. Then we come down to prorations. The prorations are always taken care of by escrow. However, I always want to make sure that if there is a, what do they call it, supplemental tax bill, that the supplemental tax bill is talked about ahead of time. Here's what I tell buyer. Let me just tell you something. You're buying a house for $1 million. Proposition 13 says the minimum property tax on $1 million is 1%. 1% of $1 million is $10,000. If you had trouble with that, get a calculator. That's a commission. Is a $10,000. Buyer. It doesn't matter what it says in escrow. Those are the seller's property taxes. Your property taxes will be a minimum, if it's $1 million sales price, of $10,000, probably closer to $12,000. And I even write it out. I put it on a piece of paper and I write it out. And I say, see, buyer, this is what your costs are going to be. And I have them sign it. So there's no discussion. When they get their supplemental bill, they go, what is this? Well, this is what I told you about. Yeah, that's just my office policy. I don't know what your office policy is. Then compensation. The only reason we're in this deal is for compensation. We do not decide what the buyer should pay your seller. We don't guarantee performance. We don't provide estimates on repairs. We don't guarantee repairs. We're not responsible for identifying. We're not responsible for any of this stuff. Buyer, if this is a concern to you, get an expert. Seller, if this is a concern to you, get an expert. We are an expert in the contract, the forms, explaining the forms. I don't know why the chimney doesn't work. You need somebody else to tell you about that. I didn't guarantee that the title company would do their job. You need to make sure that you take culpability for that. All I'm responsible for is making sure I explain the contracts to you. I get the timely fashion, make sure I keep you up to date on all these different things. That's what my duties are under this contract. Okay, what if the sellers... Okay, so what if what if the seller's agent falsely states the offer prices are higher in order to get better offers from then they're in violation of law and they're in violation of the code of ethics. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you on that one. It's just one of those things. Do they ever lie? Like rugs. Right? If they say, oh yeah, I've got an offer here. I say, oh really? You're telling me about it? Yeah, show it to me. Email it to me. I mean, if you can tell me about it, you can show it to me. So now I got verification. Do agents ever lie? Don't get me started. All right. This is the representative capacity. Now, here's what this says. On page 1 of the purchase agreement, it says Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. What if it said ABC Realty, ABC Incorporated? At that moment in time, under California law, a corporation, who signed this contract? Oh, it was being signed by the president. Well, then I don't really care. Then the title company wants to make sure that the president who's signing this transaction has the right to sign. So we need to have what's called a corporate resolution. It's a corporation. Oh, no. It's an LLC. Then I want to see formation documents that shows who can sign on behalf of the business entity. Oh, it's a trust. Then I want to see legal documents of the trust. Now, reality check. Do I care? No. Who cares? Title company, escrow company. So here's what I'm saying, buyer. If you're buying it as a trust, be ready with your trust documents, because before we're going to be able to close this, the title insurance is going to make sure that you can actually sign on the behalf of the trust. Same thing with a corporation. Same thing with a court order. Same thing with if we're in probate. They're going to require these things. So that's all this is saying. Whoever name is on the first page has to be the same name on the last page that signs it. If it's different, then we need a representative capacity. It's called Representative Capacity Signature Disclosure, RCSD. Okay. Now we get into escrow. Oh, this is the escrow instruction. Remember I told you this is the escrow instructions? Purchase agreement says you don't need escrow. Now, my office policy is seller says, buyer says, you know what? I don't want to use escrow. Well, then you don't want to use my company because escrow does too much to protect me in my transactions. So I'm getting into that. You find another broker. Here's what they cover. Here's the paragraphs. 1 through, wait a minute, what happened to 2? 2 has nothing to do with this contract. 2 is confirmation of your agency disclosure. Disclose, elect, and confirm. That just says 2 doesn't concern the buyer and seller. It just says if you didn't do this, you are not entitled to a commission. So that's why it's not included here. It's not part of the contract. As far as the buyer and seller are concerned, it's part of your communication with the state of California saying you did the 3 steps: disclose, elect, and confirm. All right, let's see what else we got here. If the selling agent is ignorant and denies disclosing, ignorantly denies disclosing without buyer's confidentiality, as the buyer's agent, would that compel them to a disclosure? If they ignorantly deny, I would say we're getting into a legal area. You need to call a legal hotline on that one. Would it be wise to write an addendum that requires the seller to validate an offer? You already do. That's part of this purchase agreement. The seller validates this offer. It's the last 2 paragraphs in this contract. That's why we need to get, I'm so happy you're in class because you're going to get the answers on these. All right. So the first one is you're going to have, a lot of these are legal things. You're going to have to call up CAR legal because I can tell you what the law says. I told you what the law says. I don't know what'll happen in court. I don't have a clue what's going to happen in court. I've been to I've reviewed a lot of court cases where it's like, where'd they get that from? All right. So this is the contract. And then it says you get a copy of it. This is law of copy. If you don't get a copy of this agreement, you're not obligated to it. That's law of copy. And it says, and so we sign it by digital link. We sign it by digital link. Their copy goes to their email address. Otherwise, it's not a valid deal. So that's why this is law of copy. And it goes down here, and this is my favorite part of the contract right here, 21C. It says brokers are in this solely for compensation. We're just in it for the money. Okay. Buyer and seller irrevocably assign the commission. So we go into escrow. Everybody's happy. Everybody loves everybody. As escrow goes along, things start happening, and the seller gets mad at you. And the seller says, "Dadgummit, I'm mad at Joel." Calls up escrow, says, "Escrow, don't pay Joel." Escrow says, "Well, I have to." You irrevocably assign the broker's compensation when you sign the contract. Love this agreement. Okay, I get all this work, and then the seller gets a wild hair and says he's not going to pay. No, escrow going to pay me. All right, let's see here. Got a couple of questions here. Let's see what. Okay, it says if the seller's agent. Okay, and then it says, would it be wise to write an addendum that requires the seller to validate the offer? We said other offers. Oh, to validate other offers. Well, that's in here too. I'll show you. It's right down below here. We're going to hit this. Okay. And then it says to verify. Yes. Let me show you where that is. Okay. That's 2 good questions here. One is the last 2 paragraphs in this thing, and the other one is right above your signature on the purchase, right above your signature in the purchase agreement. And a lot of, the questions you're bringing up, it's covered in here. And so it's great that you bring these up because it shows you're paying attention. Some of you out there, if I'm telling you, if I was sitting through as many webinars as you guys been sitting through, I'd be off playing games, doing other things. I'd pop in every once in a while, and I would hope to goodness that I got a copy of this so I could listen to it some other time when I've had a few edibles or something here. Okay. What? Okay. So remedies, we talked about liquidated damages. Now we get down to mediation. Here's my question. If the buyer and seller do not initial the mediation clause, must they mediate? If the buyer and seller do not initial the mediation clause, must they mediate? Yes, they must mediate because it says this mediation provision applies whether or not they initial the arbitration provision. See how Troll tricked you? If they sign this contract, they must mediate. Now, mediation is not binding. And I'm a certified mediator. Here's what happens. You got a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell. Then we have some kind of problem that comes up, and the problem comes up that the buyer and seller have an argument. It's typically a miscommunication. I get in the middle of that. I find out what the miscommunication is, and I say, look, buyer wants to buy, seller wants to sell. Let it happen. I'll give you an example. The buyer says to their agent, you know, it says there's some extra things here around the pool that I'd like to have. Ask the other agent if the seller will include those items around the pool, not the pool equipment, but the items that are around the pool. Buyer's agent says, okay. They call the listing agent. They say, the buyer wants the pool equipment around the pool stuff around the pool. Seller's agent calls the seller and says, the buyer is demanding the stuff that's around the pool. What happened? No, the buyer just said, ask them if they'll include it. If they don't, fine. It works out that, mute all here, good. It works out that it was a miscommunication. The other agent said the buyer is demanding the pool. No, the buyer didn't demand the pool stuff. The buyer was just asking if they'd include it. If there's no, okay, fine. So what happens is I get in a mediation. I'm sitting there. The buyer says this. The seller says that, well, that's not what I heard. And I say, wait, this is what the buyer's asking. Will you do it? Well, yeah, I'll do it. But he can't demand. He said, I didn't demand. Oh, okay. Deal comes together. You get paid. That's why mediation is so important. Now watch how mediation can work. Buyer, do you want to mediate? No. Seller, do you want to mediate? No. Mediation's done. But if one wants to mediate and the other one doesn't, watch the ramifications. So here's what it says. Buyer says, I want to mediate. Seller says, I'm not going to mediate. I'm going to litigate, or I'm going to arbitration. Buyer says, let's mediate. Seller says, no, I'm going to mediation or arbitration. They go to mediation. The seller goes to mediation. The seller wins. Seller says, I won. No, you didn't, bonehead, because it says right here, you're not entitled to recover attorney's fees if you don't mediate. Whoa. That's what it says. So buyer wanted to mediate, seller didn't. Seller wins in arbitration or litigation. They're not entitled to attorney's fees. Seller wanted to mediate, buyer didn't. Buyer wins. Buyer's not entitled to attorney's fees. So that gives it some teeth. So you're going to mediate in this transaction if there's an argument before you can litigate or arbitrate. My next question is, well, should you have them initial this arbitration clause? Should you have them initial this arbitration clause? I'm not a party to the contract, okay? I don't know. That's up to them. If they want to initial, they initial. They always say, oh, come on, Joel. I say, okay, here's what I'll tell you. Here's the website for the American Arbitration Association. It'll tell you all the reasons you should arbitrate. Here's the page for the California Trial Lawyers Association. It'll tell you all the reasons you should litigate. You figure it out. I'm not a party to the contract. So if you want to initial, initial. If you don't want to initial, don't initial. Here's what I do know. If you initial this contract down here, you initial this contract, you must arbitrate. If you don't initial, can you still arbitrate? Yes, that's all I know. Then it says there's some other things in here that are under law that you can go to court for and you can still arbitrate. And then it talks about selection of services. Brokers don't guarantee the performance of any of these people we recommend. You always, buyer and seller, may select any provider You choose. Don't hold me liable if they don't work out right. The MLS, we're going to put it in multiple listing service. We're also going to get your attorney's fees. If you go to court and you win, you get your attorney's fees. If you go to arbitration and you win, you get your attorney's fees, except as provided in paragraph 22. What's that? Mediation. If you refuse to mediate and the other party wants to mediate and you win, you are not entitled to attorney's fees. I don't know, that's about 60% of the deal. You know, when you win, that's about 60% of it goes to the attorneys. You better, that's not a win, that's a loss. So always make sure you mediate first. Assignment. It says the buyer shall not assign without the seller's permission, but the seller cannot unreasonably withhold consent. So here's what happens. I say, I want to buy the property all cash, close in 30 days. Here's the money. Buyer says, seller says, okay, good, let's do the deal. 15 days into the deal, I say, you know what? I don't want this property, but I got a good deal on it. I say to my buddy, hey, buddy, come over here. You've got the money. You could buy this property all cash. You want to buy it? He says, yeah, I'll take over your contract. So I assign the contract to him. The seller cannot unreasonably withhold it. They always say, wait a minute. I don't know who he is. I know who you are. What? You don't know who I am. I've told you I can buy it. I've signed the contract. I've showed you I have the money, but you don't know who I am. If he can show you he can buy the property and that he has the money, same. So you cannot unreasonably withhold an assignment. You're not going to discriminate on fair housing, race, color, sex, national origin, religion, familial status, or handicap status. These are the terms of the offer. Everything is in writing. There's nothing under the table. If you have a flyer that says you get this equipment, you'd better write it in here in the contract. If it's not written in the contract, you're not going to get whatever you think you're getting. You got it. It's in the MLS. It's not in the contract. You're not going to get it. This is the entire contract. Time is of the essence. This is the entire contract. Nothing under the table. And we got to go with the timetables. Now, here's what I love. They give you definitions here. I love the definition of days. Days means calendar days, period. However, after acceptance, the last day for performance of any act required in this agreement shall not include Saturday, Sunday, or legal holidays. You can't close on Saturday, Sunday, or legal holidays. Escrow's not open, lender's not open, recording officers are not open. It's all calendar days until you have a deal. Then it's going to go, let me move over here and get this done. Then it's going to go to every day except Saturday, Sunday, and legal holiday. And then come on down here, it gives you definitions, signed, and then the expiration of the offer. The buyer signs this offer and it expires on the third day. I get buyers that are all excited. They want to buy something. I'm all excited to buy. So they find this house, they make an offer on it. I submit the offer. An hour later, they're calling me. Did they accept? Did they accept? Did they accept? I don't know. Nobody's talked to me yet. Next day, they call me up and they say, hey, Joel, let's go look at more properties. I said, wait a minute, you got an offer on one already? Yeah, I want to go look at more. I say, okay, so if we go and look at more properties and you find the one that you find another one you really like and you make an offer on it and they accept the offer. And then within 3 days, they accept this offer, you now have 2 properties. Oh, I didn't think about that. Good, let's think about it. Well, I don't want 3 days. Okay, good, then put down by whatever time you want. It's good for an hour, it's good for a day, it's good for a week, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be 3. 3 is just the default. You put down if you want sooner or later. One or more buyers has capacity. So they're the president of the corporation, they're one of the partners in the LLC, they're the trustee. Then I want to see the RCSD. And then if there's a counter to this, so then it gets signed down here. Acceptance of the offer. If there's a counter, then we're going to put a counter in here, subject to the counter offer. If there's no counter, then the seller signs. Then they initial, buyer initial. Now, if you don't initial, it's okay. You can just follow the law. The law tells you there are other ways in which you can confirm. Buyer makes an offer, seller accepts the offer, confirm acceptance of the buyer without getting their initials. There's many different ways you can do this. Just make sure that your seller, that your broker says it's okay. Because it's not a binding contract. Buyer makes an offer, seller accepts the offer, and then you communicate it back wrong. You don't have a valid binding offer. If it goes to court, you ain't going to get a commission because it's not a binding offer. And then it says you're not part of the contract. It says it on the first page and the last page. And it says the only reason you're signing this contract is you're confirming your agency relationship. That's the only reason. Now, we get into some interesting area here in Real Estate Brokers D, Cooperating Brokers Compensation. This is a CBC, it's a form CBC, Cooperating Brokers Commission. You're in the Arcadia Association of Realtors. You belong to a certain MLS. The MLS is not a Arcadia Association of Realtors. That's your association. You belong to an MLS. Let's suppose you belong to an MLS that I do not belong to. Whatever it is. I belong to one MLS, you belong to a different one. I'll just tell you something. In the metropolitan LA area, you could swing a dead cat and hit 5 different MLSs. So with that in mind, I make an offer on a piece of property in Arcadia. I'm not a member of your MLS. Your MLS says if another member of your MLS submits an offer, they are entitled to a commission. Since I'm not a member of your MLS, the deal closes, I say, send me a check. You say, I don't have to send you a check. You're not a member of my MLS. My agreement was with people in my multiple listing service. You're not a member of it. I don't have to pay you. So my office policy to avoid that kind of fun and games is we get a cooperating brokers compensation, CBC. Whether I'm a member of your MLS or not, whatever you've offered to other agents in your MLS is what you agree to pay me. Called a CBC, just another form, and make sure that you understand what it says. Now, I don't know what your office policy is. Remember, you got to make some notes here. You've had some questions you need to ask your broker, or legal questions you need to ask CAR Legal. You want to make sure that you understand what the CBC says. Some agents take offense to this. Some agents don't understand it. I understand it. What you're doing is you're saying, I'm doing all this work. I want to make sure I get paid. I'm with you 100%. Now, we've had some fun and games here with agents who, remember, we are one of the less than 40% of the United States that can represent both buyer and seller. So I'm a listing agent. I get a listing. It's a good listing. I know I can find a buyer for that listing. So other offers come in, I just don't show the offers to the seller. That's a violation of real estate law. Law says you must present all offers, even if they're frivolous, unless the seller tells you not to. I never had a seller tell me, don't show me offers. They always want to see them all, even if they are frivolous. So I'm the listing agent. Another offer comes in. I say to that agent, they didn't want your offer. Or I don't even reply back. I don't even call you back. I don't text you back. I don't email you back. You don't even know what happened. And the buyer says, what happened with my offer? What happened with my offer? I don't know. Joel never calls me back. He never texts me, never emails me. I can't find out anything. So here's what this is saying. If you make an offer, you want to know if it was presented? It says presentation of the offer pursuant to standards of practice 1-7. You are a member of the National Association of Realtors. You subscribe to the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics, Article 1 says, basically, you will not lie, cheat, or steal from your clients. Underneath that are what are called standards of practice. And the standard of practice says 1-7. If the buyer's broker makes a written request, the seller's broker shall confirm in writing that the offer's been presented to the seller. So now it's a hot listing. Don't think that they presented my offer. I'm another agent. This is ABC, this is XYZ. I submitted an offer. I don't think this agent submitted it to the seller. I can have my broker with XYZ contact the broker of ABC and say, I want written confirmation. The written confirmation is right down here. It says the offer was presented on this date at this time and initialed. Now, these two paragraphs are not required by law. They're required by what I call being polite. My office policy is you tell the other agent when you presented their offer. And if it was accepted, we're celebrating. If it wasn't accepted, then you're going to have the seller's initial and date it. That's just being polite. You don't want to do that? Here's your real estate license back. Now, I don't know how your broker does it. I'm just telling you what my office policy is. So as we go up here, we see that we have this obligation under our code of ethics. And if you don't do this, there's a charge of action against you and your broker for not presenting offers. And here's what we found. There's been a lot of agents who had a listing, they had a buyer for that. There was an offer that came in that was a better offer, but they didn't present it because they wanted both ends of the commission. That's not only a violation of law, you must present all offers, it's also a violation of the code of ethics. And you can be brought before the grievance committee and pro standards committee. So we've answered a couple of questions that were in here. What if they don't do that? Well, you can just tell them, get it done. You tell your broker, make a written request of the seller's broker to confirm. And what they have to do is they have to show you this. Now, if they lie here, if they're lying here, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, they're in violation of the code of ethics, but you're going to have to get the seller to testify against them. That ain't going to be easy. Then we have this in here and it says, this is the seller's. So if we're going to go through escrow, we go to escrow, we give them this copy of this. These are the escrow instructions. Escrow, all they have to do is they do their other stuff. They don't have to type up all new escrow instructions. This is the escrow instructions. I want to know, escrow, did you get the deposit? Yeah, I got the $3,000 deposit. Good. And then what's the escrow number? Because I'm going to need to refer to that and who the escrow officer is and what their telephone number is. And if you want, are they under the business oversight, insurance, or Department of Real Estate? Just in case there's any complaints, where you go to. Well, there's two last pages here, but this page right here, the buyer's inspection advisory. This isn't an advice. It says buyer. This is a good idea. If you're interested in the condition of the property, square footage, wood destroying organisms, whether the soil is stable, if there's water utilities, if there's any environmental hazards, earthquakes, fire, permits, rental properties, you should probably do your own investigation. This one page is an hors d'oeuvre for this one. Remember this one? This is the statewide buyer and seller. This is 14 pages. This one is only one page. This is one page, buyer's inspection advisory. If you don't include the 14, and you should because it's contractual, it's in there, at least they get this one. So they go, oh, hey, I have some questions on things. Good, let's get them answered. And I always give them the 14 pager because it's amazing to me how many times they'll say, what? I didn't know that. Well, I want to know about that. And so they ask about it, we get it handled, and now it's not a court case. Nobody wants to go to court anymore. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to go to court and win. I don't want to go to court and lose. I don't want to go to court. Every time I go to court, something happens that's different than what I thought should happen. Now, this last page, this is the California Consumer Privacy Act. Here's what it says. Buyer and seller, we want you to understand. We're going to put this on the MLS. So seller, your information is going to go out to the world, number one. Number two, we're going to be giving this information to third parties. So they might contact you and ask you things like, would you like, hi, you got your property on the market, would you like to move? Would you like a moving company? Now, they're not supposed to use it for that, but they might. Buyer, we're going to put this information out in the MLS. We're going to say, this is who sold it, this is who bought it, and this is what they bought it for. Is that okay with you? So there's some information that's going to go out here that's going to be to third parties, and those third parties might use the information. So this third party might say, oh, well, we're using this for Redfin, Zillow, whatever. It went out to the internet, became general information, and now a third party might use it for to derive values at, or what's called big data, buying habits and selling habits and things like this. You acknowledge that you received a copy of it. If you say, no, I don't want this, then you have to tell everybody. And there's a remedy to this, and I don't know what it is. I guess you just don't sell your home through the MLS. So that's the purchase agreement. It's the last page in the purchase agreement. This is 16 pages. 16 pages we went through. Okay. All included in your real estate purchase agreement, the RPA. And this is the residential purchase agreement. I often, not often, but every once in a while I have somebody say to me, well, Joel, can you make me copies of these and send me these things? No, I can't. Why? Because my name is on every one of them. Your name is on every one of them. If you give these away for somebody else to use, different than what you have here, like a blank copy, your name is down here. Oh, I'll just white it out. That's copyright violation. That's a federal offense. If you're convicted of a federal offense, your license goes like this. Boom, gone. Don't do that kind of stuff. This is copyright information. All right. Any questions on what we covered? You remember I was telling you about the 41 standard. Somebody asked me about the 41 standard disclosures. Here's the California Association of Realtors website, car.org. I went to Transaction Center, clicked on Transaction Center. I'm just looking around. I came down here to risk management. I went, do we have to know risk management? Absolutely. So I'm just mousing around. I went down to the bottom of the page and it said sales disclosure chart. I said, what is that? I clicked on it. It said, hi, put in your username and password, and then make sure you paid your dues. And then it says, here's the sales disclosure chart put together by Member Legal Services. Area code 213-739-8282. That's the legal hotline. And it says, if you're selling 1 to 4 residential units, standard, you use all the disclosures in this column. If it's probate, trust, or you use this column. If it's REO or foreclosures, this column. If it's apartments, 5 units or more, this column. Residential, commercial, this column. Mobile homes, the actual form and the law. "46 disclosures, of which 41 are required by law. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. If you're not, shift the risk to somebody who is. So that's why when we're using these different forms, you've got to study them. You've got to go through them. And that's why I applaud you. And I thank you for being here today and learning the information. Any other questions on what we covered? Any comments, reactions? Oh, we got a question here. Let's look at the chatty poo. It says, by the way, the seller's concessions, maximum 3%, 80%, maximum, if it's greater than 80%. So, oh, really? Is that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac? Okay, if it is, yes, okay, perfect. See, this, I'm telling you, real estate changes faster than I can change my shirts. And I started Carrington Mortgage Services, if you know who they are in the state of California, sold it out. So I've done mortgages. I'd never had an MLO because I was a little upset about how their regulations are with the mortgage loan originators and the NMLS, but nonetheless, okay. Are you available to clarify issues? Well, okay, good question. And let me do that. Let me go to everybody. So I'm going to go to everybody and I'm going to put in here Joel Gerbonkowitz. Oh, I'm sorry, Carlson. And my telephone number 714 271-7322. And my email is very complicated. It's joel@joelcarlson.com. Oops, at joelcarlson.com. Now, if you call me for legal advice, I'm an attorney. If you say, well, I just want to pick your brain, that's nice. I charge $395 an hour. I'm serious. If you say, I want clarity on this contract that I was talking, I'm fine to answer some of those. No cost, no harm, no foul. Okay, I'm happy to do that for you. But don't think you can call me every 15 minutes. And by the way, I've been in the business a long time. I have over 8,000 contacts in here. If you call me and your name is not in here, I ain't answering. You're going to go to voicemail until I put your name in here. Then I'll answer. And I'll return your calls. I return calls. I got plenty of things I return calls. I'm still using paper. I'm a baby boomer. What do you want? Okay. So feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to talk to you. But if you want legal advice, go to the CAR legal hotline. And you say, I don't want to talk to attorneys. Well, then just go here. Go to here into Transaction Center. And in here, you got all your Q&As. Here's all your Q&As under risk management. These are question and answers that all been put together by attorneys. So you can get, and I'm telling you, some of the, and I want an explanation. I want it tighter than what I get from online, or I want to print it out and I want to show it to the buyer or show it to the seller. There it is. You can make copies of these Q&As and sell it, give it to them, sell it to them, give it to them. All right, let me see here. Okay, excellent. Thank you. You've been through it twice. And I love giving these classes. You know why? Because I learn. I just learned. Now it's 6%. 3% over 80, less than 80, 6%. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines. See, that kind of stuff makes sense to me. So I learned just as much as you learned. You've been a good group. Thank you for being here. Stephanie's going to be putting on more courses through Revy, the Real Estate Video Educational Institute, which I'm the senior instructor for, Joel Carlson. And we'll be talking about 41 standard disclosures, probate, COVID, all sorts of different kinds of things. Clear cooperation. There's a whole litany of different things that are going to make your life more interesting. Coming up here pretty soon. You're certainly welcome. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you on the next class.